Welcome into another PFF NFL show. Max Chadwick alongside Dalton Wasserman here, filling in for Trevor Sycamore, who's live at Radio Row, home of Super Bowl 59 down in New Orleans. But Dalton, before we talk about the Super Bowl, the final two teams remaining in the Chiefs and the Eagles, we got to talk about the 12 teams that lost in the playoffs and do a full autopsy for all 12 of those teams, what went right for them this year, what went wrong for them this year, and also what they got to do in the offseason to have a chance to be playing in Super Bowl 60 next year. So I'm really excited to break all these teams down with you.
Yeah, you kind of, when you look at it, you realize they're not that far away considering where they got this season. And we've spent so much time going over the teams that missed the playoffs with the draft, at the top of the draft, and who needs a quarterback and who needs new head coaches and all that. But these playoff teams are a lot closer, right, to inner circle contention like the Chiefs, like the Eagles, like a couple other teams here. So it's good to see, a breakdown of what their offseason could look like and what they need to add to take that next step.
Absolutely. Before we get into all 12 of those teams, of course, all the stats that we'll be using today on today's NFL show are available with a PFF Plus subscription. You can find it at subscribe.pff.com. You also get access to all the best betting tools on the planet. I know a lot of you, including myself, we're placing a lot of prop bets on Super Bowl 59, and you get access to our full 2025 NFL mock draft simulator. You can draft a full 7-round mock draft if you want for your favorite team with a ton of prospects in there right after the Senior Bowl. Our lead draft analyst, Trevor Sycamore, just updated his big board after the Senior Bowl. So find it at subscribe.pff.com. And we got to talk about our sponsor of the show, and that is Fabric by Gerber Life. What does your child's future success look like to you? A job they're passionate about, traveling around the world, or just being happy and comfortable? Whatever their journey, you can help make it easier to achieve with a kids investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life. By making contribution to your child's future today, you can help give them the means to pursue their dreams, big and small. Fabric by Gerber Life is designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. It's all online. Manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Start with just $20 with no contribution limits, tax advantages, and your funds are SIPC insured up to $500,000. Plus, no commission fees and just a low, flat monthly maintenance fee. Unique gifting links can be shared with family and friends, so instead of more stuff, they can help grow your child's investments for their future instead. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, we're going to go in chronological order, starting off with the teams that lost in the wild card round in the playoffs, starting off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Dalton, who went 10-7 this year, lost in the wild card round to the Commanders. It was their 5th straight year making the playoffs and their 4th straight year winning the NFC South as well. So obviously, very good run for the Commanders over the last half decade or so. What went right for them this year?
So very much like last year when they had Dave Canales as their offensive coordinator. They got off hot, and then it took them a while to get through some bumps, and then they finished winning 6 of their last 7 games, and then obviously lost to the Commanders in a very tight wild card round game. I think the big theme for this Buccaneers team, especially with as cash-strapped as they are towards the salary cap, is that they had a fantastic draft class.
Yeah.
I think it starts there when you talk about this roster, developing young players the way they have, really over the last couple of years. But you look at this season, Graham Barton, you got a starting center out of, right? Tyke Smith, starting slot corner. Bucky Irving was one of the best running backs in all of football, maybe the biggest bright spot on this entire team. Jalen McMillan contributed as well at receiver, especially after Chris Godwin got hurt. This is what's going to sustain the success of this Buccaneers team, is the young talent and more great draft classes from Jason Light. And I think at the center of all of it and directing all that traffic, of course, is Baker Mayfield, who had his best season in the NFL, right? Been in the league since 2018. Obviously, the roller coaster he's been on. Now he's going to go into a year this next year with his 8th offensive coordinator in 8 years, which is just that beats the run of Alex Smith, who I think had 7-7 back in San Francisco back in the day. But Baker Mayfield driving it all at the center of it, had his best year as a passer, even though he's still kind of a bit of a gunslinger. But him and this rookie class and a lot of the younger players on this team developing is what's really driving their success and keeping them on that track of, you mentioned, 5 straight playoff years, that's how you do it. You win it through the draft. You find good players, you find starting caliber players in the draft, and that's what helps you sustain it.
You mentioned the 8 OCs in 8 years. Well, that's really because their offense is this good this year. The 4th highest graded offense in the NFL, 5th best in EPA per play. The 2nd year in a row, their offensive coordinator got a head coach job, right? Because Dave Canales last year took the Panthers job. Liam Cohen this year took the Jaguars job. I mentioned Baker Mayfield, 85.9 PFF grade. That was 7th best in the NFL, and also, like you mentioned, a career high for him as well. He had a great offensive line blocking for him as well. 2nd best pass blocking grade in the league, and the lowest pressure rate allowed in the league at 24%. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin continue to be one of the best duos in the sport, 2 of the 10 highest graded receivers in the league. You mentioned Bucky Irving, 4th highest graded running back in the NFL as a 4th-round rookie. And then their corners on defense, there's some issues defensively, but their corners specifically really good. 5th highest graded corners in the league as well. Jamel Dean, Tyke Smith, another rookie, Zion McCollum, all 3 of the top 50 corners in the NFL as well. So overall, a good year for the Buccaneers, Dalton, but obviously still 10-7, still lost in the wild card round. What went wrong, and why did Tampa Bay still lose in the first round this year?
I think what you have, the corners were solid, but you saw a lack of depth out there once you saw, especially Jamel Dean get hurt in the playoff game against the Commanders. So, but I think in general, it's just about coverage and their pass defense as a whole, right? They don't have that one elite pass rusher. Yaya Diaby was their highest graded pass rusher at a 79.4 pass rush grade. Then you had Vita Vea, and then nobody else on their D-line is above 70. So it's really about Todd Bowles trying to create with the blitz. The problem is, if you're going to blitz that much, you have to be really tight in coverage, and down the middle of the field, they had a lot of issues. Antoine Winfield was injured throughout the season. Their linebackers really struggled to cover and defend the middle of the field. So this team just got in a lot of shootouts because they had issues, especially in coverage. They don't have that one elite pass rusher when you think about a Garrett or a Parsons or a Watt or somebody like that. They've got a decent unit, but they don't have any game breakers right now, especially when Antoine Winfield is out with injury. In their pass defense, they need to figure out just one or two more playmakers, I think, especially down the middle of their defense would really help.
Absolutely. You mentioned just kind of an average defense overall this year, especially down the middle, like you said, the linebackers, the safeties as well, 26th highest graded safeties in the NFL. Antoine Winfield has always been one of the best safeties in the NFL. Career low 57.8 grade for him this past year. None of their safeties were in the top 70 of grading. Mentioned the edge rushers as well, 22nd in edge grade. And there they have 3 upcoming free agents in Anthony Nelson, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and Shaq Barrett are all upcoming free agents. 19th in defensive grade, 16th in EPA per play, 14th in run defense grade, 21st in pass rush grade, 18th in coverage grade. Overall, just an average to below average defense overall, and an elite offense to show for it, but there's a lot to do for them this offseason to kind of help fix that. So let's talk about what they need to do in the offseason, Dalton. They're 23rd in assets. So we have an article out on PFF.com. Go check it out. The Timo Riske did a great job breaking it down. Offseason asset ranking, meaning draft picks, your effective cap space, and your restructure potential. All of those combined, the Buccaneers are 23rd in terms of their assets they have this offseason. A lot of notable free agents, right? Chris Godwin, Levante David, Anthony Nelson, Ben Bredesen. New OC as well, right? Josh Grizzard is a new successor to Dave Canales and Liam Cohen. He was the passing game coordinator for the Buccaneers this past season. Baker Mayfield is another new OC for him. They got to address wide receiver. Chris Godwin's the upcoming free agent. Mike Evans is getting up there in age as well, 32 years old, even though he's the ageless wonder with, again, another 1,000-yard season. And you mentioned before, attack the defense in free agency in the draft, edge, linebacker, corner. Those are all 3 positions they should really be looking at to address this offseason. So what do you think the Bucs should do this offseason?
So I think what you have is the Chris Godwin situation first and foremost, right? Is he staying or is he going? And the problem for the Bucs with their cap situation is their roster is very top heavy, right? They're paying Baker Mayfield, they're paying Tristan Wirfs, Vita Vea's making a lot of money. That could be somebody looking at a restructure to clear some sort of space. And part of it, there's some theory that out there, especially coming off the injury, that Godwin could give him a little bit of a hometown discount, but they still have to clear the room for a guy who's probably worth $20+ million when he's healthy, right? So that's going to be the big suspenseful thing this offseason. I think as far as Levante David goes, I really don't think he would play anywhere else. My assumption is that he would stay in Tampa or he would retire, and his one-year deals have been getting kind of cheaper and cheaper every single year, and he's been slowing down a little bit, right? I think we saw a half step slower in coverage this year. That comes with age. Just been such a great player for them for a long time. So those two are the headliners, and then otherwise, yeah, it's about filling in the gaps on defense, and I would expect them in the draft to attack their defense, whether that be an edge rusher, whether it be another outside corner, maybe it's a linebacker, to try to fill that void if David does retire, or even if he stays for another year, try to figure it out, because KJ Britt really kind of underperformed this year. So I would expect most of their assets to go toward the defense, like you mentioned, but the Godwin situation has to get settled first.
Yeah, our resident Buccaneers fan, Trevor Sycamore, does think that Chris Godwin will be coming back to the Buccaneers. Like you mentioned, so we have free agent rankings available at pff.com as well. You should check them out. We have projected contracts for all the top free agents as well. Chris Godwin, our number 4 free agent, his projected contract is 3 years, $60 million. So $20 million a year. Like you said, they're probably going to pay $20 million to keep Chris Godwin. Levante David, 1 year, $6.5 million, right? A lot cheaper than Chris Godwin. But those are two, obviously, legends of that franchise. Both of them should probably be coming back for another year. And listen, if Tampa Bay can figure it out with another new OC and fix that defense, I mean, they could absolutely make their 6th straight playoff and might be the favorites to win their, 5th straight NFC South title as well. So it's a good place the Buccaneers are in, but obviously there are still a lot of ways they can get better and improve off of what was a wild card finish for them this past season. Let's go to another wild card team, Don. A little more surprising one. The Denver Broncos going 10-7 this year, losing in the wild card round to the Bills. It's their first time making the playoffs since winning the Super Bowl 9 years ago with Peyton Manning at quarterback. It's been that long since Denver made the playoffs, and they made it in their first year with Bo Nix at the helm of their offense. So what really went right for the Broncos this year?
Their rookie quarterback found the right head coach to play under in the right situation. And I think there's a couple of things that go into this. One, Sean Payton obviously just knows how to work with quarterbacks. And it just, when he was drafted, it seemed like the right pairing.
Yeah.
Right? Bo Nix plays relatively safe football. He's on rhythm most of the time. He doesn't put the ball in danger. Just a 1.8% turnover-worthy play rate, right? And the good news is he's got a really good offensive line to work with. The 4th highest graded offensive line in the NFL. We saw when he was at Oregon. When he's protected, he's lethal. No question about that. Now, this year, what you saw, I think that helped their offense as well, was he was able to take off and run when he really needed to, right? As opposed to, so many young kids put the ball in danger. And it's kind of a special year that we didn't see that much. We'll talk about Jaden Daniels, after this, where Bo Nix just didn't beat himself. And I think Sean Payton and his team really took on the identity of, we don't beat ourselves. If you beat us, then fine. If you shut down our offense because we don't have enough weapons necessarily yet, or, if the defense, they had some injuries in the secondary for a little bit, if you can beat them that way, cool. But we're not going to beat ourselves turning the ball over. And I think that's the biggest thing that Bo Nix brought, was just a level of stability that they really haven't had at quarterback since, you mentioned it, since they had Peyton Manning, which is 10 years now. So I think the combination of this offensive line and Bo Nix on offense really set them up for success. And then their defense, look, they improved. This was the 2nd lowest graded defense in the league last year. They went up to 10th this year. Yep. You saw it. Their defensive line was a lot better. Zach Allen and those guys up front. Pat Surtain had a bounce-back year, might win Defensive Player of the Year. He's in that running. I mean, they just, Riley Moss on the other side, getting Brandon Jones at safety to replace Justin Simmons. Just more fundamentally sound football all the way around. And that's what they were hoping for in year 2 of Sean Payton. Obviously, you had the whole Russell Wilson situation, and he wanted to, filter that out and get Bo Nix, get his guy in there. And I think they really took on the identity of Payton this year.
Yeah, Bo Nix, I remember pre-draft, we're looking at all the top quarterbacks, and when we talk about Bo Nix, we're like, man, Denver is the picture-perfect landing spot for him. Because like you mentioned, he's a guy that plays on time and in rhythm. And the big problem with Russell Wilson, his time in Denver, with Sean Payton wants the quarterbacks to play on time and in rhythm. Russell Wilson's a little more of a freelancer, right? So that's why there's a little bit of friction between those two. Bo Nix does that exactly what he wants. And remember, I'm not comparing him to this guy, but Drew Brees was so good with Sean Payton because he played on time and in rhythm, right? So Bo Nix is kind of in that mold where he's just going to run the play call and allow the play call to do its job. 17th best grade in the NFL this year, and while that sounds like, he's below average, for a rookie quarterback, that's excellent, right? A 78.3 grade is a really, really good grade. We've been kind of spoiled over the last 2 years with C.J. Stroud and Jaden Daniels. A 78.3 grade and 17th in the NFL in grading for a rookie quarterback, really damn good for Bo Nix this year. You mentioned the 4th highest graded offensive line in the league, the best pass blocking grade in the entire NFL, the 10th best run blocking grade in the entire NFL, and then defensively, 6th best pass rush grade, 11th best coverage grade. They had 75 sacks in the regular season. That was 14 more than any other team in the NFL. 398 pressures, 16 more than any other team in the NFL. I mentioned Pat Surtain, also the highest graded corner in football. And the most impressive part of the defensive line, in my opinion, was there wasn't like a true superstar. It was just a collection of guys that really played well, and they were able to get a lot out of their defensive line because of it. Now, what went wrong for them this year, Dawn, I think they had virtually nothing in the receiving core outside of Courtland Sutton. There was 91 players in the NFL this year that had 500 or more receiving yards. 91 of them. Only 2 of them played for the Broncos. And one of them, Marvin Mims, had 503 yards. So just barely crossing that 500-yard threshold. 67.7 team receiving grade, 5th worst in the NFL. Sutton is far and away their number 1 option. And even him, you're like, okay, I'd rather have him as like a good number 2. I don't think he's a clear-cut number 1 option for a team. 5th worst rushing grade in the NFL. They only average 2.5 yards after contact per attempt, which is 3rd worst in the league. And their linebackers are the 7th worst grade in the NFL as a unit as well. So I think the surrounding talent for Bo Nix in the receiving core and at running back needs to be improved.
I think it's something we're going to talk about a lot in the lead up to the draft, because it seems like every mock draft we've seen right now has got them either going receiver or tight end, right? And that's exactly the right move when you have a rookie like this and the luxury is already having a top 5 offensive line. Now you can just start splurging on weapons, right? And they need that. Now, Marvin Mims is a decent gadget player, I think, and they got a little bit maybe more out of Devon Vele than they thought they would, as I believe a 7th-round pick. But they need one more primetime weapon, right? I don't know necessarily who that might be. We're going to speculate for months on end, especially with that 20th pick in the draft. And I don't think they have quite enough cash to get in on the T. Higgins discussion unless they were to clear some space and really kind of sacrifice elsewhere. But you have a good start with Sutton. I do think their run game needs to improve a little bit. The second half of the year really kind of slowed down, and there were times when Bo Nix was really their best runner as a scrambler. So I think just adding more depth to this offense. But the fact that they made the playoffs with the roster the way it is, when I think a lot of people were expecting them to be in last place in this division, it was a fantastic year for Denver, and now they just got to fill in the gaps.
Like you mentioned, they made the playoffs for the first time in 9 years with a rookie quarterback. It's a great, great year for Denver. You mentioned a little bit about what needs to be done in the offseason. Is there a specific guy at number 20 overall that you like for Denver? And also, what else do they got to do this offseason?
I think we're going to speculate about where these 2 tight ends go in the draft. Penn State's Tyler Warren and Michigan's Colston Loveland. Those could both be options that really don't have much production at tight end right now in Denver. Or I think a guy, you add some speed, you add some after-the-catch ability. I keep thinking about a guy like Luther Burden III from Missouri. That's somebody who could give him some big playability, because I think that's kind of a little bit of what's missing. I need that one dynamic player who can make plays after the catch, because we know Bo Nix is a more conservative passer, right?
Yep.
A lot of passes closer to the line of scrimmage inside that 10-yard range. Is very, very accurate in that range, and that's where he prefers to throw the football. So if you get the ball in rhythm to guys who can make plays after the catch, somebody like a Luther Burden, then you're talking about, okay, that's what starts to open up more deep shots downfield for Courtland Sutton when all the attention has to come up closer to the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, Luther Burden would be a picture-perfect fit, I think. I don't know if he'll fall there, so if they want to trade up maybe to get a Luther Burden, that would make a lot of sense. Emeka Egbuka, I think, would be a really good fit in that offense as well. Just a guy that just gets open, and he's pretty good after the catch as well for Bo Nix. And also I think a guy like an underneath threat, like you said, Luther Burden III or a Emeka Egbuka, makes a lot of sense in that offense, right? So Broncos 22nd in offseason assets between draft picks, effective cap space, and restructure potential. DJ Jones, notable free agent. Javonte Williams, notable free agent. And Cody Barton. And then, like I said, they have to spend that 20th overall pick, in my opinion, on either a wide receiver or tight end. They got to improve this weaponry for Bo Nix. And in what's a loaded running back class, take one of those running backs, man, right? Get one of them in there. This is one of the best running back classes we've had in the NFL draft in a long time. Take one of them, right? I've already put together my running back rankings for the draft. My number 22 guy is I would really like that guy in my room, right? So it's a really, really loaded class, top to bottom, honestly. And then defensively, they're pretty good there. Linebacker and safety, I think, are still 2 places they can get a little bit better at as well. So I think that's how Denver can, go from a team that goes 10-7 to a team that can make a little bit of a deeper run. Now, it's hard to do in the AFC West when you got a Kansas City Chiefs going for a 3-peat right now, but still really encouraging year for the Broncos, and could probably maybe get back to the playoffs again next year if they improve on some of those things. Let's go to another team in the AFC losing in the wildcard round. That is the Pittsburgh Steelers, 10-7 record on the year, losing to the Ravens in that wildcard round. 4th time for the Steelers making the playoffs in the last 5 years, but Steelers have now lost 6 straight playoff games, Dawn. So it's been a really rough go for the Steelers, at least in the postseason at least. What went right, though, for Pittsburgh this year?
So, well, if I was keeping it simple, the first 13 games, right? I mean, a 10-3 start that I think really what it came down to was you have the best defensive line in football that was playing so well that it pretty much hid any of their other flaws, right? It gave their offense breathing room to work, to not have to score 30 every night. They're the hardest team in football to block, I would argue, with T.J. Watt, Cam Hayward, and Keanu Benton, and Highsmith, and Herbig, and every other freak on their defensive line. They were so good through the first 3 quarters of the season that really you didn't have a whole lot of answers for beating the Steelers as long as either Justin Fields or Russell Wilson was playing well. We saw Fields play decent early and really help out in the run game. We saw Wilson come in with the deep ball with George Pickens and be effective in the middle of the season there. But I think it's just a matter of them having to fill in beyond that. So when you look at what went right, there really is just a hard cutoff of, okay, if we're playing the Steelers and we don't let this defensive line absolutely dominate us, then they become more beatable. But as far as what went right, again, you had Russell Wilson for $1 million. So, for as poorly as it ended, scoring 17 or fewer in their last 5 games, he gave him a whole lot for $1 million. Right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he gave him a whole lot. Justin Fields went 4-2 through their first 6 games as well. I think they got a lot more out of these quarterbacks than we thought, and that 10-3 start is in large part, that's really the second biggest reason where it came from outside of the defensive line, is these 2 quarterbacks gave them enough when they were protected to score enough points so this defense, could just take games over.
Yeah, relative to contract, Russell Wilson might be the most valuable player in the NFL.
Patrick
Mahomes is up there, obviously.
It's a fair assessment because there was a chance with us not really knowing which quarterback was going to start the season. Wilson was, coming off a preseason injury. Fields had a whole bunch of mystery around him coming from the Bears, and who knew if he had anything as a passer, and he got him off to a 4-2 start. Nothing to complain about there. And then Mike Tomlin makes the gutsy decision to go with Wilson anyway, even after the 4-2 start, and that works also. So it just feels like, again, what went right for the Steelers, they're just always going to be at least above 500, right?
Yeah.
It's just what went right, again, is the Mike Tomlin voodoo first and foremost. But no, their defensive line is elite. They got better quarterback play, I think, than we thought they would. But we get to the end of the season here, and we still have a handful of questions about them with the rest of the team.
Yeah, really, the front seven for the defense was the best part. 4th highest graded defense in the NFL, 8th in EPA per play, best pass rushing grade in the NFL at 90.5, 11th best run D grade, 6th best tackling grade in the NFL. Mention the defensive line, 87.3 defensive line grade. That was the best in the NFL by over 5 points. Easily the best defensive line in football this year. Cam Hayward, who is 35 years old, was the 2nd highest graded defensive tackle in the NFL this year, only behind Chris Jones and T.J. Watt, 3rd among edge defenders in PFF grade. Alex Highsmith, 8th among all edge defenders in PFF grade. Also on offense, 9th best run blocking grade for Steelers O-line this year. They had some issues in terms of pass protection, but run blocking, they were really good. And then at least average play from their quarterback in Russell Wilson. He was 14th in PFF grade this year. And for the Steelers, they'll take league average play at quarterback, considering what they've had in recent years for them. In terms of what went wrong for them, Dalton, you mentioned it. They lost their final 5 games of the season, and 4 of those 5 games were against teams that made the playoffs. So there was a clear cutoff between, okay, we can mention most of the year it was a pretty easy schedule for the Steelers. Once they had to play the good teams, they started losing. Steelers are one of those teams where it's like they'll always beat the teams they're better than, and they'll always kind of lose to the teams that they're not, they're worse than. And overall, there's not enough juice offensively. 22nd in EPA per play, 25th in yards per play, 9th worst pass blocking grade, 13th worst receiving grade, only 17th in rushing grade, and only average quarterback play, like I said before. It's hard to overcome that when you only have a league average quarterback. And defensively, front seven is phenomenal. The 10th worst coverage grade, though, in the NFL as well. All 3 of their corners graded below a 56, and Beanie Bishop Jr., Joey Porter Jr., and Dante Jackson, 7th lowest graded secondary in the NFL overall. So while the front seven was elite, the secondary still left a lot to be desired.
I think the general theme right now is, for as good a year as it was, and making the playoffs with this team is great, and they keep Mike Tomlin's streak alive. I have the same number of long-term questions about the Steelers as we came into the season with, right? Who's the quarterback?
Yep.
Who are the weapons beyond George Pickens? Who's playing offensive tackle? Because with Broderick Jones and Dan Moore struggling as they have been, and Troy Fautano only played 1 game before injuring his knee and missing the rest of the season, what does the offensive tackle situation look like? And then you just mentioned it with the corners. The main issue with their secondary was the corners on the outside. And it became a formula where as long as you get rid of the football quick enough to the outside, you can start moving the ball on this defense, because the defensive line, there's only so quick they're going to get there, especially if they're not covering on the back end. So this is really the question for the Steelers. I think especially offensively, they need to have conversations about what their identity, what their philosophy is on offense. Because as the year went on, and it worked for a while, but then deep ball regression comes into play. As you get into, you can get cold with it too, and that's what happened in those last 5 games. If you're just an offense that relies on chucking up go balls, it's going to come and go. And that's exactly what happened. And that's not a philosophy that's sustainable for long-term success, right? So I think they need to have real conversations in the building about what they want to be as an offense, because they can't just keep scratching by with, okay, our offensive tackles aren't great. Okay, we don't really have a long-term quarterback here. Okay, we need, somebody other than George Pickens, and we're always just waiting for someone else at wide receiver to emerge. I think there's a lot of holes to me, especially on the offensive side of the ball for this team, and they need to figure out what longer-term solutions are instead of just continuing to Band-Aid it year in and year out.
So let's talk about what they should do in the offseason, specifically on offense, specifically at quarterback as well, because there's a dilemma now. Do you bring back Russell Wilson, who maybe he's a little bit of a higher floor than Justin Fields, but he's 36 years old, or do you try to see if Fields has something in the tank? There's been reports out that say they're likely going to go with Justin Fields next year instead of Russell Wilson. There's been also a lot of reports saying maybe Russell Wilson goes to Las Vegas, reunite with his former head coach and Pete Carroll down there with the Raiders. What would you do for the Steelers this offseason? What would you do at quarterback for them specifically?
I think you've maxed out what you can get out of Russell Wilson. I don't see a reason to go into next year, especially if the offense is just going to be, okay, he's got a good deep ball, but there's not really many other answers unless you start building around him. I think Fields is a reasonable solution. I don't know that that's a multi-year answer unless we see him go out there next year and play really, really well. But again, whoever the quarterback is, they need other answers on this offense. Yeah. They need to figure out what this offensive tackle situation is, because we go into another year where they've taken a tackle in the first round of each of the last 2 drafts, and we have still no idea if those are solutions or not, right? Dan Moore Jr. is a free agent now. I'm not sure that I would re-sign him based on his performance over the last few years. And then again, at wide receiver, you have George Pickens. At tight end, you have Pat Freiermuth. And otherwise, there's really not anybody consistently productive enough to support whoever the quarterback may be, whether it's Fields or Wilson or a younger kid. Who knows if they would trade up in the draft or maybe kind of reach at that 21st overall pick a little bit there. So I think there's very, very key spots on their offense. They need to figure out a plan here. And there's not a ton of receivers out there. I know this has been a team floated as maybe a Chris Godwin destination where, okay, he's a legitimate number 2, if not a 1A and 1B with George Pickens. When healthy, he's probably about on that same level. But they need more answers on the outside. They need to hold up at offensive tackle better than they have been. And they do need to figure out how exactly Arthur Smith wants to run this offense, because, you almost forget that he was their offensive coordinator, because they didn't run their offense like an Arthur Smith offense at all this year. Again, eventually it was just, we're going to slam Najee Harris into the wall and he's a free agent too, or we're going to chuck a go ball to George Pickens. It was very simple. I think a lot simpler than Smith wanted it to be. So there's a lot of questions to answer at key spots.
Absolutely. They're 18th in offseason assets this year in terms of draft picks, effective cap space, and restructure potential. Saw all the free agents in that list. There's even more. Justin Fields, James Daniels, Russell Wilson, Dan Moore Jr., Najee Harris, Mike Williams, Van Jefferson, Landon Roberts, Dante Jackson, Cameron Sutton, all of them free agency year. All of them played a pretty key role for this team this year. It sounds like Justin Fields might be the answer for them, at least for next year at quarterback, and sounds like Russell Wilson might be moving on to another team, likely the Raiders as well. And then, like you mentioned, got to find receivers to complement George Pickens. With Mike Williams and Van Jefferson as free agents, could use that first-round draft pick on a wide receiver. A guy like a Emeka Egbuka, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Steelers team. And then secondary as well, got to improve at corner. Because last year, like I said, the corners really, really struggled. Pretty much everywhere else in the defense is pretty set. I think at corner, they really, really need to improve as well. So a lot of things to answer for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but yet again, they made the playoffs for yet another year. The Steelers, their 4th time making the playoffs in the last 5 years. But They've also lost 6 straight playoff games. They're going to try to, at least advance to another round instead of losing in their first playoff game next year if they can make it back to the playoffs. Talk about another AFC wildcard team that is the Los Angeles Chargers, going 11-6, losing in that wildcard round to the Texans. Made their playoffs in the first year under Jim Harbaugh as the head coach after going 5-12 the year before. Only their second time making the playoffs in the last 6 years. Dalton, what went right for the Chargers under Jim Harbaugh this year?
A whole lot. I think a whole lot, right? When you think about Jim Harbaugh having to come in and change the culture of this team, which was kind of an issue. This is one of those franchises where the culture and kind of the negative connotations on them are a big problem, and we think about them losing big games and things of that nature. But he went and turned around and made this team in his identity, right? And I think it starts with a really good rookie class that includes 4 potential stars, not just potential, but maybe even stars. Joe Alt at right tackle was fantastic. Ladd McConkey, one of the best rookie receivers in football. And then Tariq Still and Cam Hart, 2 day 3 picks at corner, came in big time for him, especially Still was fantastic all season. I think 2 guys that we maybe didn't expect to play that well that early in their careers. But you have a situation where Harbaugh looked at this team and said, okay, we have talent, we're going to have a good draft class, and we're just going to play better football, because that was an issue with the Chargers. It was never a shortage of talent, especially when you have Justin Herbert playing quarterback. And let's start there. Herbert was just fantastic. 3rd in the NFL in passing grade this season. Rifling balls down the field, under pressure, clean pocket, whatever. Anytime you turned on Justin Herbert this year, especially after the first 4 or 5 games, he played just spectacular football, and I think that pairing was what makes you the most optimistic going into the long-term outlook of this team, where you go, okay, Jim Harbaugh's got Justin Herbert now. You could argue this, other than maybe Andrew Luck at Stanford, that Herbert's the best quarterback he's ever had. I mean, even better than anything he had at San Francisco or Michigan. I mean, all these years, and it's such a weapon to have a guy who can so easily make every throw on the field. And Harbaugh, as the season went on, figured out how to take advantage of that. The other thing is that they played just phenomenal defenses.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, just fun. They went from 19th to 3rd in defensive grading. They were very good. They didn't allow explosive plays. That's the biggest thing that we saw, I think, for at least that I saw from Harbaugh and Jesse Minter running the defense, was they just did not get beat over the top. Even if you scored a bunch of points on them, there's a couple teams that did. I think about Tampa Bay. I think about Denver in the first half of their second game. They make you earn it, right? They don't just give up bombs down the field. They don't give up explosive plays, and that's really just the sign of a team playing more fundamentally sound football. So that's what they did on both sides of the ball. If you're asking just simply what went right, just about everything. When you really think about it, when you consider this team won 5 games last year and needed a complete culture shock to turn it around, and Harbaugh found a way to accomplish it, and he still has not had a losing season at any level, in any full season. He went, I think, 2-4 in 2020, the COVID year at Michigan. I believe he still hasn't had a full losing season since 2008. Which is just, I mean, that's just at Niners, Michigan, Chargers.
Mike Tomlin.
I mean, it's just, it's really, he's basically doing the same thing that Mike Tomlin's doing. Just, the COVID year is what it is, 6 games. That doesn't matter much. And then, flipping between NFL and college, which is almost more impressive, honestly, to do it at both levels. But no, Harbaugh accomplished, I would say, just about everything he wanted to this season.
You mentioned it. Justin Herbert thrived. And I know the playoff game left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. What was it, 4 interceptions, right, against the Texans? But he was still phenomenal this year. Only Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow had a higher passing grade this year than Justin Herbert. Defense, 3rd highest grade defense mentioned, 19th last year. Dalton, basically the same personnel they had last year as well under Brandon Staley, but Jesse Minter came in and just completely revamped this defense. 2nd best coverage grade in the NFL, 7th best run D grade, 12th best pass rushing grade. Derwin James had a big bounce back year. He had an 80.8 grade, more than 20 points higher than what he had the year before. Poona Ford, 5th highest graded D tackle in the NFL. Khalil Mack somehow is like a fine wine, gets better with age, man. 5th highest graded edge defender at 33 years old. And then Tariq Still, 17th best grade among all corners as a 5th round rookie. Offensive line as well, 12th best pass blocking grade, and maybe the most exciting young tackle duo that we have in the NFL between Rashawn Slater, 2nd highest grade tackle in the league. 1st round pick Joe Alt was 24th in the NFL, and then Ladd McConkey was a top 15 receiving grade in the NFL as just a rookie as well. So a lot went right for the Chargers this year. In terms of what went wrong for them, I mean, they had the 4th worst rushing grade in the NFL, 21st in run blocking grading. You know, Jim Harbaugh teams, look back at the time at Michigan, they love to run the football, and they just really couldn't do it at an effective rate this year. 6th fewest yards after contact per carry in the NFL. Neither J.K. Dobbins nor Zeke Elliott were in the top 40 of grading. Interior O-line needs some work. They're kind of set at tackle, Slater and Alt, obviously, but the 7th lowest graded interior offensive line in the NFL. Bradley Bozeman, their starting center, upcoming free agent. Even he wasn't that very good this year. And the receiving core, I think, outside of Ladd McConkey needs a lot of work because Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer, both outside the top 64 wide receivers in PFF grade. And Will Dissly was not even a top 25 tight end in PFF grade either. What do you think, though, went wrong for them?
No, I think it's exactly that. It's just offensive depth, right? I think it was very clear in the playoff game, and I know Herbert didn't play well, but we don't need to have an existential crisis about Justin Herbert. They just don't have enough, right? Ladd McConkey was the only guy that could get open in that game. And there was a couple other games where that was the case, right, where we saw some of their lower scoring outputs in certain games this year. It was, okay, is anyone other than McConkey here going to step up? Josh Palmer was hurt for part of the year. You mentioned the struggles at tight end. Quentin Johnston's been inconsistent, to say the least, through his first 2 years. They need somebody who can just get open on the outside, especially because we know McConkey's going to run the slot now for years to come. That's not a question. And he can move outside too when they just go two receivers, and he's extremely versatile. But I think McConkey in the slot role as an explosive player in there is going to be a serious problem. They just need more threats on the outside to complement it. To me, this is a team now, especially I didn't realize until after that playoff game, they're 6th in the league in effective cap space, and they're probably going to cut Joey Bosa, which whether they re-sign him or not is going to give him a lot more. I think $20+ million more of this is a quiet team I think about T. Higgins for. Because I know New England and maybe Washington and Carolina and some of the other higher cap space teams, and especially a couple of those who haven't been great this year and desperately need a receiver. But you think about the combination of Higgins on the outside and then McConkey moving all over the place. This is one I really think about, and that could be very dangerous. And then you talk about, okay, what if they were to lock in Higgins in free agency? I think another big priority is going to be re-signing Khalil Mack, and they may have some competition in doing so, but he says he's going to play another year. You get Higgins in free agency, and this is another team I think we talk about maybe getting one of those tight ends in the first round if they're available. If Colston Loveland, who Jim Harbaugh used to have at Michigan, is available, now you're talking about really filling in 2 spots, right, in one offseason, and you're looking really dangerous on offense. I think they're another team, too, that you mentioned how deep the running back class is. I think in the mid-rounds, they could, even as high as the second round, they could get in that territory with one of these talented backs. I don't know if Harbaugh would stomach it to draft one of those Ohio State backs, but we'll see where all those storylines go. But I think that's what it is. It's just filling in the offensive depth of this team, and then Khalil Mack is something you're going to hear about very early in the offseason.
Yeah, you mentioned it. They're 13th in offseason assets this year. A big reason for the effective cap space number, though, they have a lot of free agents. Khalil Mack, Asante Samuel Jr., J.K. Dobbins, Poona Ford, Elijah Molden, T.R. Tart, Josh Palmer, Bradley Bozeman, Morgan Fox, Denzel Perryman, Christian Fulton, all of them upcoming free agents, all of them played a key role for this team this past year. You mentioned it, running back, wide receiver, tight end, all of them have to be improved for Justin Herbert. Ladd McConkey, I think right now is the only constant. Everywhere else at receiver, tight end, running back could stand to be improved. And then have to improve the edge room as well. Khalil Mack, upcoming free agent, he should be re-signed, but again, he is 34 years old, so he's not really a long-term answer at edge, even though he's seemingly getting better with age. And Joey Bosa, coming off a career-low 61.1 grade, just seems like injuries have really taken a toll on his career. They have Tuli Tuipulotu, who could be a long-term answer at one spot, but finding his partner for the other long-term answer early in the draft, and what is a loaded edge class, could be a top priority for this team this year. So Chargers, really, really great year under Jim Harbaugh in his first year with the Chargers, but still some ways to get better and still some ways to compute the Chiefs at the top of the AFC West as of right now. Let's go over to one of the NFC teams that lost in the wildcard round. That is the Green Bay Packers, who finished the year at 11-6 and lost in the wildcard round to the eventual NFC champion Philadelphia Eagles. It was the Packers' 5th playoff appearance in the last 6 years, but it was the first time losing in the wildcard round since 2013. 11 years ago was the last time they lost in the wildcard round. But Dawn, what went right for Green Bay this year?
So I think it's actually what went right for them is the production they got out of guys that they brought in this past offseason, right? When you think about Josh Jacobs was the 3rd highest graded running back in football. I'll tell you, there was plenty of talk during the season about how great Saquon Barkley was in Philly, how great Derrick Henry was in Baltimore. Josh Jacobs needs to be mentioned in that category because I know he didn't rush for 2,000 yards, but he was the engine of this entire team, if we're being honest. Even in the playoff loss to Philadelphia, you could argue he was the best player on the entire field. And I think it started with the fact that they could run the football. They had a real workhorse. And I know the past couple of years they've had Aaron Jones, who was getting a little older, and A.J. Dillon had some injuries, and they could capably run the football, but not at this level. And when you think about the impact that Jacobs had, especially early in the season when Jordan Love got hurt and Malik Willis had to come in and play a couple of games, and they won those games because they could run the football, right? And Willis, he only had to throw the ball 18 to 20 times, and they could use his legs a little bit. I think it goes back to Josh Jacobs first and foremost on offense, being able to control the football, to have answers when the deep shots weren't working for Jordan Love, because they very often weren't this season. We saw some old habits kind of kick in for him, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Jacobs was spectacular, and then you look at some of the guys who emerged on their defense that they acquired last offseason. Xavier McKinney, I said it last offseason, was my favorite free agent signing of any player in the NFL. Turned out that part was right because he just was fantastic back there at free safety in Jeff Hafley's defense, right? The interceptions, I think if he wasn't number one among safeties in coverage grade, and he was in the top 2 or 3.
Second, yeah.
He was second. I mean, you just have a guy who was the ball hawk in the middle of a defense that they so badly needed. They were among the worst safety groups in the league last year, and McKinney came in and made them one of the best. And then I think another guy I need to highlight here is Edgerrin Cooper at linebacker, their second-round pick. He was just, again, the theme is improving the middle of this defense, and there's still a ways to go on it, but these two guys are going to be centerpieces of that. Now they just need to fill in more talent around them, especially at defensive tackle, and we'll see if Quay Walker, I think Quay Walker might get one more shot at linebacker, but they might bring in some competition for him at that other spot. But there's no question that this defense now is going to be built around McKinney and Cooper.
Yeah, you took it a lot, I was going to say, honestly. The one thing I'll say as well, third best pass blocking grade in the entire NFL. They only allowed a sack 4% of the time. That was the third best rate in the league. Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker each earned 80-plus grades in pass blocking at tackle. Elton Jenkins led all guards in the NFL with an 81.6 pass blocking grade. I mentioned Josh Jacobs before. 1,039 yards after contact. Only Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley had more than this past year. Jair Alexander, another guy who's really good in that secondary. 10th among corners with a 78.3 coverage grade, 4th best coverage grade overall in the NFL as a team. And then Edgerrin Cooper, 4th highest graded linebacker. It's just a rookie, man. He was phenomenal at Texas A&M, maybe the best linebacker in college football last year, and he immediately looks like a top 10 linebacker in the NFL as a rookie. In terms of what went wrong, I think, Dalton, the big thing for me, their receiving core lacks a true number one receiver. Their highest graded receiver is Jaden Reed. He was 49th in PFF grade this past year. Defensive line kind of played average ball all year, 23rd in grade as a unit. On plays without a blitz, they only got a pressure about 32% of the time. That was 19th in the NFL. And the other thing, Jordan Love kind of up and down all year as well. He was 25th in big-time throw rate and 20th in turnover-worthy play rate. Now, of course, does not have a lot of wide receiving. That will be a point of emphasis for them this offseason. I still think he's a franchise quarterback for them, but still wasn't a great year for Jordan Love either.
I think what worries me with that, and you mentioned 17 big-time throws, 17 turnover-worthy plays. You saw some of the habits that were there earlier in his career in the first half of the 2023 season before he got hot and made that playoff run, is just certain times where he's looking too far down the field too consistently, right? And we mentioned it with the Steelers and Russell Wilson. You can't be that constantly reliant on the deep ball. And we know Jordan Love, he's a home run hitter, he's a gunslinger, he's going to take big swings, but he's got to do the things in between, right? Especially when you have a running game that's going to suck those linebackers up towards the line of scrimmage and you have those intermediate windows to work with. You don't have to take deep shots all the time. And I think that's going to be a point of emphasis to reel back in the fundamentals. And I know early in the year he had the injury. I think it threw him out of rhythm a little bit, the knee injury, but you don't always have to hit home runs. I know we would love to. That'd be fantastic if we could hit a home run every.
It's a Brett Favre mantra right there.
Precisely, and that style of football just works less and less nowadays, right? You see quarterbacks that play maybe not more conservative ball, but they don't put the ball in harm's way, right? You think about Mahomes and Burrow and Allen.
All the too high looks that we're getting now, you basically have to.
Exactly. You have to take what the defense gives you, and I think that's what would worry me the most with the Packers is that he fell into some old habits, and can we re-break those? Because we've seen it. Jordan Love when he's really running the offense as it should be run, he can be one of the best quarterbacks in football. There's no question. He's as talented as anybody, but it's those old habits and the fundamentals and trying to, hone in. I think Matt LaFleur even talked about we got to get his footwork right again, right? It's a constant battle with a guy like that when it's okay. He wants to go out there and control the whole game, but you have to do it in a way that's fundamentally sound. The other part of this team for me, I just think they need a consistent pass rush. I think it's too many times this year where they just did not get to quarterbacks, and I say it all the time. You let good quarterbacks stay clean in the pocket, they're going to hurt you. Because this defense, they force turnovers, but they're not good enough to not get any pass rush, and I think there was too often where they had that problem too.
So obviously they're pot committed to Jordan Love, paying him $55 million a year. What can they do this offseason, though, to take the next step?
Look, I think they have to find an answer. I think this is where I start thinking about in the draft they might go with a wide receiver.
Finally.
Because finally, maybe not. It's not.
I got to look up the last time they took one.
It's not in their nature. Was it in the 90s? I don't even remember how it was forever ago because they never did it for Aaron Rodgers. So, I start thinking about a wide receiver because and look, Christian Watson's always hurt. Jaden Reed's a solid slot option, but he has a hard time beating man coverage. Romeo Doubs is decent, but I think eventually you need that one guy. You need a Jamar Chase. You need a Justin Jefferson. I don't know if they'll get a guy of that caliber. Those are the best receivers in football, but you need somebody who you can trust and just go, okay, one-on-one, isolated, that guy's going to win. The Texans have that now with a guy like Nico Collins, right? They can be found in the second and third round if you get the right guy, but you have to be able to line up at some point and just have somebody who can win the battle. Right, and they don't have that. The other spots I'm looking at, again, edge defender, and they've had a problem at their CB2 spot across from Jair Alexander for years, and I don't think the Eric Stokes pick from a few years ago has worked out. He's a free agent now. They need to find answers, I think, still in their pass defense, but they need a weapon, a legitimate number one weapon that Jordan Love on any play can go, that guy's going to get himself open.
Yeah. They have not taken a first-round wide receiver or tight end since 2002 when they took Javon Walker in the first round. 2002.
But then they may continue. Look, there's wide receiver depth in this class for sure. They may continue to do it on day two. They got Devontae Adams in the second round back in the day.
Got Randall Cobb in the second round.
Jordy Nelson was a later pick. I mean, they've had a long history of doing it, but if there's somebody they really like with that 23rd overall pick, you got to at least think about it at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't keep skidding by with, okay, these guys are decent targets, but they're reliant on the scheme. And the problem is a lot of them can't beat man-to-man coverage.
Yeah, and I would argue the second most, in today's pass-happy game, the second most valuable position after quarterback is probably wide receiver. And they just have not spent a ton of resources at that position, so I think they need to do it. Packers are 19th in assets this year in terms of draft picks, restructure potential, and effective cap space. 3 notable free agents, Josh Myers, TJ Slayton, Isaiah McDuffie. They have to find a true number one receiver, whether that be in free agency or the draft. And then you mentioned it, find another edge to complement Rashawn Gary, because Kingsley Enagbare, Lucas Van Ness each earned sub-60 grades at Lucas Van Ness pick. I mean, I didn't love it in the first round a couple years ago. He's not really looked great in his first couple years in the NFL. So that might not have worked out. They need to find another edge there. And then another corner, I think, to complement Jair Alexander. No other corner besides Alexander was in the top 50 of grading. Another thing, too, find a new starting center. Josh Myers is a free agent. Probably should let him walk. He has not been a top 25 highest graded center in any of his 4 seasons in the NFL. You got free agents like Drew Dalman, Ryan Kelly, Coleman Shelton. Those are options for them. It's not a great class in terms of the NFL draft at center. So we'll see there. Maybe you can maybe you could move a guard into center, or maybe take a guy like Jared Wilson in the NFL draft, but not a great draft for center. So I think a free agent option could be the move for Green Bay there.
Could be. There's also some shuffling options that could happen, because there's been talks in the past about maybe moving Zach Tom in there, even though he's a great right tackle. I might not move him. There's thoughts that he could be an elite center. You'd think about, what they have, what their options are with Jordan Morgan, who was injured for the most part this year, and is he a guard or is he a tackle? If we move Tom inside, could he play right tackle? Elgin Jenkins, could we move him to center and find other options at guard? So I think there's a lot of moving parts on this Packers offensive line. And again, they had to deal with the Jordan Morgan injury this year, really set him back, because they didn't get to see what he could do very much inside or outside. Even when he was in at right guard, he was rotating mid-game with Sean Ryan, and Ryan eventually ended up being the healthier player and the better player, at least for this year. But they do need to figure out the shuffle on that offensive line, because it just feels like you have you have spots that need to be filled and maybe players that could fill them, but how do you want to align it to get the best 5 on the field?
That's a really good point because they do have two of the most versatile offensive linemen, say, in the NFL between Zach Tom and as well. So I think, they move one of them to center could be, and Elton Jenkins could be a really, really fun move for them. And actually a move that could work. And Jordan Morgan's a good shout out too because he was a first-round pick for him, right? And he's a guy that could be or should be a long-term answer for them either at tackle or guard in the NFL. One final team in the wildcard round to go over, staying in the NFC North with the Minnesota Vikings with a 14-3 record this past year, but they lost in the wildcard round to the Rams. It was the Vikings' best record in the 21st century. The last time they had a better record was 1998, and Kevin O'Connell, in 3 years as the Vikings head coach, has made the playoffs twice now. So really good run for him. He might even win Coach of the Year this year. Dalton, what went right for Minnesota this year?
I mean, for as much as the last 2 games went wrong, what went right was the fact that Sam Darnold, after J.J. McCarthy's injury, came in and played borderline elite football for most of the year. I mean, an 80.7 overall grade this season, I think, is even dragged down a little bit by poor performances in the final 2 games against the Lions and Rams, but Darnold, I mean, he saved the season, really. And I don't even think this is not a team I don't think that could be reasonably expected to go 14-3 when you were looking at preseason expectations. A lot of people had them in last place coming into the season, right? Oh, well, if Sam Darnold's going to be in for a bit, and then they're going to go to McCarthy, and then McCarthy goes down with a knee injury in the first preseason game, and it felt like the Darnold resurgence was everything it possibly could have been for this team, right? And I know about now there's going to be arguments about what he's worth on the free agent market and how good he is, but I think he proved he's a starter, right? He proved he's certainly one of the 32 best, and he took advantage of Kevin O'Connell's play calling, of an elite receiving core starting with Justin Jefferson. TJ Hawkinson got healthy midseason. So the emergence of Darnold really took them to a place where I don't think anybody thought they could get to this year outside of when they were playing the Lions and the Rams, right? Those were only 4 losses. And then Brian Flores and their defense. They just did a spectacular job. They really struggled in 2023. They allowed the 5th fewest points in the NFL in the regular season. We know he's aggressive. We know he's got the blitzes. They brought in some free agents like Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard that made them better. But I think they just had everything that they almost couldn't have expected. Between Darnold and the way this defense played really above the sum of its parts, I mean, you don't go 14-3 for nothing. They were fantastic this year, and the big question now is just going to be, it feels like Darnold's going to move on after the last 2 games really kind of sunk his stock a little bit. Now the question is going to be, can they get that same level of production or something similar out of J.J. McCarthy coming off a knee injury?
Yeah, you mentioned it. Sam Darnold completely revived his career. 80.7 PFF grade. First time in his 7-year career they graded above a 66, right? So by far a career year for Sam Darnold. Big reason for that, they have the 4th best receiving grade in the NFL as well. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison form one of the best young duos in the league. Top 10 tight end as well in TJ Hawkinson. You got Christian Darrisaw, who of course missed most of the season with an injury, but he and Brian O'Neill continue to be one of the league's best tackle pairings as well. They're the 4th best run D grade in the NFL, only allowed 4 yards per carry, which is 4th best in the league, and a very, very deep edge rotation between Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, and first-round rookie Dallas Turner as well. So there's a lot of things that went right for Minnesota this year. In terms of what went wrong, interior and trenches between the offensive line and defensive line needs a lot of work. The interior offensive line, 22nd in grade as a unit. They allowed a pressure on 18.8% of pass blocking snaps in the interior, worst mark in the NFL. Interior defensive line, they had all 4 of their D tackles who played enough snaps were 60th or worse in PFF grade this year. And overall, big reason for that, 24th in pass rushing grade, 11th in pressure rate, but a big reason for that, Dalton, Brian Flores blitzed at easily the highest rate in the NFL at about 55% of the time. So yes, they did have an above average pressure rate, but they also blitzed at the highest rate in the NFL to get that as well. So what else do you think went wrong for Minnesota this year?
I think a couple of things that kind of it muddies their future outlook, or maybe what we think is going to happen next year and how we got to this point, was the McCarthy injury in the preseason, where you really just you had a rookie year where he just didn't get to play, right?
Yeah.
I do think that is something that's tough to deal with and has put them in this situation that they're in. And then I think the Christian Darrisaw injury in their first loss to the Rams, that really set back their offensive line. You mentioned the struggles on the interior. Those usually happen with this team anyway. But Darrisaw getting hurt in Week 8, I think especially in the run game, started to put, it started to hinder their effectiveness on offense. And you started to see that, you look at the Rams game in the playoffs that they lost to out in Arizona, and the big theme, even more so to me than Darnold in that game struggling, was what did they give up, 8 or 9 sacks in that game?
Yeah.
I mean, he just stood no chance. Eventually, against good front sevens, you need your star left tackle out there, and they just struggled. They struggled to pass protect down the stretch. They struggled to run block really from the second Darrisaw got hurt. I know they tried to fill it with Cam Robinson, but he's not Christian Darrisaw, so they need him to get back healthy. He's a huge part of their offense as well. It's always good to have stars in the trenches like that, but it's a good supporting cast for McCarthy to walk into. Now they just got to be sure his knee is healthy and he can really get into the fundamentals of this offense in the same way that Darnold did. I don't think he doesn't have to do anything different than Darnold did. Just protect the football. Kevin O'Connell is one of the best play callers in the league, and just use the talent that's around you.
So, 2 questions. 1, what should they do this offseason? And 2, would you go with J.J. McCarthy as your starting quarterback moving forward, or would you try to re-sign Sam Darnold after how good he was this past year?
It's so tough because of those last 2 games, right? Because I was in the boat where re-signing Darnold, he was playing at a level where you can't let that go.
Yeah.
Right. And now I think we see, especially with what they've committed to McCarthy, right? What was it, the 10th overall pick? They're probably going to go with McCarthy. I get it, and I think the part where I do get it is that Kevin O'Connell's proven he can work with just at anybody. Right?
Yeah.
He's put up points with Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins, and then Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold and whoever else. I think at this point you have to go with McCarthy in this system, and I think what it does too is still free up your salary cap, and you can continue to go find interior offensive linemen. Maybe it's a team that thinks about, hey, maybe we have all this cap space. We're in the Trey Smith running, right? And we find ourselves a solid right guard. You already have Brian O'Neill. Garrett Bradbury's okay at center. Darrisaw's a star at left tackle. I think you fill out the offensive line, you fill out the defensive line a bit, and you start really rounding this team off. It's the economic advantage of having a quarterback on a rookie contract, right? When we talk about the Texans, when we talk about the Commanders, and now this team, if you have one of those good young rookie quarterbacks you can build around, you have a lot more money to build around it with them. So I think offensive line is going to be a big one. I think that's going to be a big one, and I think they're another team. Running back is going to be big in this upcoming draft. I don't know if it'll be in the first round, but they're going to go find a horse because, look, Aaron Jones is 30 years old, gave him a solid year, but they really need a horse in this offense because they want balance.
And Aaron Jones is an upcoming free agent as well, so who knows if they can bring him back for another year. Vikings are 14th in offseason assets this year between draft picks, effective cap space, and restructure potential. Notable free agents: Sam Darnold, Cam Robinson, Aaron Jones, Cameron Bynum, Byron Murphy Jr., Harrison Smith, Stephon Gilmore, Dalton Reisner, Jonathan Bullard, and Jerry Tillery, all free agents this upcoming year. You mentioned the interior offensive line needs a lot of work to help new quarterback J.J. McCarthy add some top-end talent at D-tackle. I think at pick number 24, a guy like Walter Nolan, who's really good in the Senior Bowl, or Kenneth Grant could be in play there. And then in a deep running back class as well, I think you got to draft one. I think it's a necessity for them.
I'll tell you the guy I love, if he falls to the second round for this team specifically, Caleb Johnson from Iowa.
Ooh, yeah.
That would be a
zone
move.
Scheme,
that same exact scheme, that outside zone Shanahan kind of scheme that they ran a lot at Iowa. He is one of the masters of it in the running back class this year. If he were to fall to them, I forget exactly what number it is in the second round. If he were to fall to them in the second round, I think I would sprint the card in. He, among all the running, obviously Ashton Jeanty is great for anybody. I don't think he's going to fall as far. Now, if somehow, some way, teams devalued running backs enough where Jeanty got to 24, sprint it in and take him, because now you got another freak on this offense. But no, I think a guy like Caleb Johnson from Iowa would be the perfect fit in their offense, the way that they run it, with the way that O'Connell's run schemes are.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, too, we haven't talked about it yet, I think more talent at corner they got to add as well. You got Byron Murphy's a free agent, Stephon Gilmore's a free agent as well, and still, even with those guys, they still weren't great at cornerback this year. So I think maybe even at number 24 overall, I think a cornerback is absolutely in play for Minnesota. All right, that wraps up all the wild card teams for their autopsies. Now, we're going to do the divisional round losers. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the sponsor of the show. That is Cherry Bundy, the performance drink fueling the health-lete revolution. It's got natural products and ingredients with no added sugar. Tart cherries are the highest antioxidant fruit or vegetable in the world. It's a natural anti-inflammatory with incredible benefits like reduced soreness, increased recovery, and it contains naturally occurring melatonin to help improve your sleep. And it helps support your immunity as well. Used by nearly 500 collegiate and professional sports teams. Every NFL team uses it. 10 of the last 11 Super Bowl champions use Cherry Bunny as a part of their daily regimen, including the Philadelphia Eagles and Kansas City Chiefs, about to be 11 of the last 12 Super Bowl champions. Every team playing in Europe or Brazil this year had Cherry Bundy with them. 66 out of 67 Power 4 teams. Every college football and college basketball national champion since 2007 have used Cherry Bundy as well. Their products are available on Amazon, cherrybundy.com, and at retailers nationwide, including Publix and Kroger. And to get 20% off, use the code PFF20 off all orders at cherrybundy.com. All right, Dalton, let's go on to the divisional round and the divisional round losers with the Houston Texans going 10-7 this year, beating the Chargers in the wildcard round, losing to the Chiefs in the divisional round. They've won the AFC South and lost in the divisional round to the Chiefs in both years with DeMeco Ryans as head coach and C.J. Stroud at quarterback. In the 3 years before they got there, they were 11-38-1. So an incredible turnaround immediately with DeMeco Ryans and C.J. Stroud. What went right for Houston this year?
You've got, to me, the makings of an outstanding defense, right? That we're going to get into some of their offensive struggles, but an outstanding defense. First of all, off the edge, adding Danielle Hunter was just perfect to pair with Will Anderson, and then you had Derek Barnett rotating in there a little bit. I think you've got one of the best, if maybe this year the premier edge duo in the league, right? You have that, and I think, I'll tell you what, their second-round pick, Kamari Lassiter, emerging at corner alongside Derek Stingley. Boy, I mean, you're talking about a pass defense, especially if they can get in a playoff situation where they can get ahead of teams. They're going to be extremely dangerous, right? And I think all they need to do is kind of fill out the meat and potatoes on the inside of this team. So I think their defense, their pass defense, especially when they can get ahead of teams, is going to be the premier part of why they can keep up with, other quarterbacks like Josh Allen, like Patrick Mahomes, like Lamar Jackson. It can keep them in these games. And I think the other one is that Nico Collins is a number one receiver, and him emerging to that level, especially when Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell went out with injuries and Collins continued to prove he's an elite player at this level. They've got the foundation of a fantastic football team. They just need to fill in some of the details of it, on the inner parts of their team.
Absolutely. 7th best defensive grade in the NFL this year, 6th in EPA per play, 7th in coverage grade, 10th in pass rush grade, 13th in run defense grade. You mentioned the edge duo, which is outstanding, between Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., two of the 15 highest graded edges in the league. Dalton, they have a very exciting young corner duo as well. Derek Stingley Jr., 5th highest graded corner. Kamari Lassiter, the rookie, 20th highest graded corner. Both of them aren't even 24 years old yet.
They are lights out.
They are, and they're so young as well. It's just incredible. Jimmy Ward, Jalen Petrie, each among the 20 highest graded safeties in the league. And then you look at the offense. Nico Collins, 2nd highest graded receiver in the league. Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell, when healthy, Tank Dell, formed a lethal trio, I think, as well for C.J. Stroud. Now, unfortunately, with injuries, Nico Collins, and unfortunately, it's Tank Dell later on in the year, couldn't really see the three of them on the field that much together, as much as you want to see them. But still, when they are on the field together, they should at least form a lethal trio. Now, we'll see what happens, because Tank Dell coming off a second straight serious injury. Stephon Diggs, a free agent as well. We'll see what happens to that trio. But that should be a good trio for C.J. Stroud if they bring it back next year. In terms of what went wrong, guys on the offensive line for the Texans. 25th highest graded offensive line in the NFL. They were 21st in pass blocking grade, 37% pressure rate allowed, 25th in the NFL, and they're only 25th in run blocking grade as well. You combine a bad offensive line with a ton of injuries at wide receiver. I know C.J. Stroud took a little bit of a dip in his second year, but it's at least explainable considering what happened to that offense this year. He was still 13th in the NFL with a 79.9 PFF grade. So it wasn't a bad year from C.J. Stroud, just didn't really take a step forward from what was an excellent rookie year. And then looking at the defense, the one thing with the defense I think could be addressed, all 4 of the defensive tackles earned sub 60 PFF grades this past season. But for you, what else kind of went wrong for Houston this year?
No, I think it's just interior play. And I think you mentioned the interior. The offensive line is a huge problem. Obviously, you have Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, who's a fantastic player, but the rest of their offensive line is an issue. If you're going to have a pocket quarterback like C.J. Stroud, you have to protect him. That's not a question. Any team that is trying to win a Super Bowl needs big-time pass protection. The other part, the interior of their defensive line, their run defense needs to improve. I think the interior of their defensive line, and really you saw when Azeez Al-Shire got suspended, they struggled at linebacker too. So I think the middle of their defense and just not, I think the best examples of what was wrong with the Texans defense, right? We know the pass defense is great and they're great when they're ahead. You look at that Ravens game they played on Christmas Day, and they just stood no chance because they had stood no chance of stopping the run against that. And I know nobody stops Lamar and Derrick Henry very often, but I think to get beat that badly and feel like you have no chance in run defense against a more elite running team, you can't have that, right? You can't have a clear formula where, okay, we might have the number 1 pass defense in football, but if teams are running down a throat all night, then it really doesn't matter. So I think when I'm looking at what needs to be fixed for this Texans team, it's just the inner parts of it, right? And we talk about the draft. I think there's no reason that I could see, unless they love a receiver, I think it has to be interior O-lineman or interior D-lineman in this upcoming draft. One or the other, and it'll be a good pick, and DeMeco Ryans will find whoever fits in either of those roles, but they have to add talent to those 2 spots.
They have to. They're 24th in assets this year. They got a few notable free agents as Stephon Diggs, Derek Barnett, and Folorunso Fatukasi. The offensive line, they have to improve. Especially the interior, you just broke it down. I mean, Kenyon Green, he looks like unplayable through 3 years. They took him a first-round pick out of him at the guard for Texas A&M. Just has not looked good at all for them. And then neither Jarrett Patterson nor Juice Scruggs look like the long-term answer at guard. I'd say, at center either for Houston. And Shaq Mason, still a good enough guard to start, but he's consistently gotten worse over the last few years. But you got to improve so much else in the interior offensive line between the center position and the other guard position with Kenyon Green. Shaq Mason could still be a starting caliber player for you, I think, in Houston. And they mentioned the interior defensive line. I think Kenneth Grant at 25 or Walter Nolan, if he falls that far, should be heavily looked at. And then add help for Nico Collins. Nico Collins looks like one of the best receivers in the NFL right now, but he needs more help. Stephon Diggs, upcoming free agent. Who knows if he gets brought back for another year. And Tank Dell coming off his 2nd straight major knee injury in 2 years as well. So, again, it's a great year for Houston after 3 straight horrible years for Houston before this. So, back-to-back AFC South championships, back-to-back divisional round appearances. Great year, great 2 years for DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud, but still some things to improve on for Houston to get a little bit farther. And Dalton, Houston Texans, the only team in the NFL that has never made it to the conference championship game. So they're right there. They're right there. Just got to do a little bit better to advance to their first ever conference title game in franchise history. All right, we're going to break down the rest of these playoff autopsies, Dalton, but we got some breaking news here on the PFF NFL show. One of the best defensive players, one of the best players in the NFL, Myles Garrett, has officially requested a trade. I remember after the season was over, he said, I'm not going to be part of a rebuild. I will get out of here if it's going to be a rebuild. And looks like Cleveland might be rebuilding. And Myles Garrett says, like I told you, I'm not going to be here. So immediately, what's your reaction to one of the best players in the NFL, Myles Garrett, requesting a trade?
This is now the biggest story of the offseason. And you have a player, arguably the best defensive player in football. Really, when you look at what he's done up to this point in Cleveland, one of the best defensive players of all time is what you're talking about. Just became, a trade target for who knows how many teams in the NFL. And we've talked about even several teams here already. When we've talked about Green Bay, and there's a couple other we're going to get to where you go, yeah, they need pass rush. They need pass rush help. I mean, this isn't just pass rush help. This redefines what your entire defense is. I mean, honestly, even the Browns this year only winning, 4 games? You saw they were a threat any given week. And the first reason anyone will tell you is, oh, you have to find some way to block 95 or triple team him. He can single-handedly wreck a game. This isn't just a good defensive end. This isn't just some guy who, can come in and supplement. This is a cornerstone of any defense in the NFL, no matter where he goes. And it suddenly became the story of the offseason. Who is going to trade for the best pass rusher in the NFL? And I don't know the last time that we saw a player of this caliber. Obviously, we had Deshaun Watson through all his issues at quarterback, and we've had huge trades like Russell Wilson. But, aside from quarterbacks, when is the last time that we had a trade that could have been this big? What, maybe Randy Moss?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the type.
Luka Doncic 2 days ago.
Luka Doncic 2 days ago down in Dallas. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's something that I figured was on the table. And I think the Browns should welcome this. And I know Myles Garrett, he's a franchise. He's going to be a Browns Hall of Fame or Ring of Honor, whatever they do over there. It's just they need to reset this. They blew it on the Watson trade. I would trade. I've said it for weeks. I would trade Garrett. I would trade out of that second pick. Yeah. I would go full tilt. And I understand doing that, they may not win a game next season. I get it. But their roster is not ready to take on a rookie quarterback this season. I would not take a rookie quarterback with that second pick. And, okay, so maybe they think about an Abdul Carter or a Travis Hunter. I get that part. Me, personally, I would trade down. I would just get as many assets as I possibly can, especially when you think about you could start a bidding war. Say the Jets, the Raiders, maybe some other teams about getting up to get Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward ahead of the Giants. Or even if you just get something ancillary for the Giants to move up one spot. We saw the Bears, wasn't it the Bears did it with Mitch Trubisky? Or the 49ers did it one time where teams will move up one spot. The Eagles with Jalen Carter did it. If you get a third or a fourth round pick out of the Giants and you still get one of your guys third, fine, but I wouldn't take a pick with that second pick. I would not do it.
And Travis Hunter would be great for the Browns, but if you trade back to the Giants at number 3 overall, you still get Abdul Carter.
Well, and I think you could still get Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
The Giants, whoever is going to trade up to that second pick is going to take a quarterback.
Yeah.
It's the idea of securing one of what we think right now is one of the only 2 viable quartthis, first-round quarterbacks.
We were at the Senior Bowl. They are the only 2 viable quarterbacks in the first round.
Yeah, it was tough to watch. So this I think is actually, for as much as it hurts, I think it's good for the Browns organization. Sorry,
yes.
Tyler. to reset everything. Because for Myles Garrett in his prime right now, you will get at least 2 first-round picks. And they need to completely reset this. They blew all their draft capital. They made the Deshaun Watson trade. They gave him the baseball contract. It spiraled completely out of control in a way that I don't even think we could have seen coming with how bad. I mean, they're picking second overall, and they're only in, the third year of that contract? It's unreal. And now he's torn his Achilles twice in a few months. So it was a disaster, and I think at this point, from Garrett's perspective, look, I get it. He said it. I don't want to go through a rebuild. I want to win. And the fact that they made the playoffs twice with him and he sees okay, this is what it's like, he wants to win a ring. And he's the type of guy who can go to one of several teams and potentially do that because, again, you could argue he's the best defensive player in football.
Yeah, and you can understand the frustration with him, right? I mean, they made the playoffs with Baker Mayfield. They get rid of Baker Mayfield very unceremoniously, and then they just never figured out a quarterback after that, right? Deshaun Watson has been an absolute disaster for that team as well. And you mentioned before, yes, it hurts, I'm sure, for Browns fans to see this when your greatest players of all time requesting a trade out of there. But it's almost like a necessary evil you have to do if you're Cleveland, right? You have to just completely tear this down to the studs and rebuild. Myles Garrett, 2021, highest graded edge in the league. 2022, highest graded edge in the league. 2023, highest graded edge in the league. This past year, second highest graded edge in the league. So he has been, by all accounts, the best defensive player in football for the last few years as of right now. So you mentioned before, maybe a first-round pick, maybe 2 first-round picks it will cost for Myles Garrett to end up getting him. Let's talk about some teams, Dalton, that might be interested in the Myles Garrett sweepstakes here. And if he wants to get traded to a contender, there are some contenders that need some edge help. You talk about the Washington Commanders that just made the NFC title game. They need edge help. The Detroit Lions, imagine a pairing with him and Aiden Hutchinson. I don't know how they would make it work cap-wise, but that would be a terrific pairing as well. The Atlanta Falcons have desperately needed edge help for a half decade now. That would be incredible with the whole Michael Penix Jr. era starting there. And maybe if it's an Atlanta trade, maybe you can get Kirk Cousins out of the deal for Cleveland and just kind of have that at least for Cleveland at quarterback for the time being before they completely reset at quarterback as well. Maybe Seattle, right? Seattle could use some help at edge defender as well. So what team really stands out to you that should be going all in on Myles Garrett right
So
now?
The Atlanta one is difficult because you're still talking about taking on a guy with a $20 million cap hit next year, which actually when you look at what Garrett does, $20 million is a bargain as far as a cap hit. But those are the teams I look at, the combination of contention and salary cap space. I think the first one, surprisingly enough, or maybe not, is the one we've talked about for a while with this theory, the Detroit Lions. Because if you ever had Aiden Hutchinson and Myles Garrett on the same on the same side of the field, that's almost not fair.
Aiden Hutchinson was the only edge in the NFL with a higher grade than Myles Garrett.
Right. So you have the two best edge players in the NFL on the same team. That's immediately where the Lions, these are teams that made the playoffs with lower first round picks. To me, if I'm the Lions, I don't have any reservations about handing them 2 first-round picks and maybe something else to get this done, because we're going to be in Super Bowl contention and we're going for it. And what a way to get kind of the morale back after a tough loss to Washington, and we're getting there in a minute, and losing both coordinators, right? All of a sudden, okay, what defensive coordinator wouldn't want to go with Aiden Hutchinson and Myles Garrett? They're bound to get a pretty good candidate who wants to work with that. I think about that. You mentioned the Commanders. Absolutely. When you talk about Myles Garrett, there's guys who are good players, and there are guys that change your whole defense. The Commanders they did a nice job this year. They patched it together. Yeah. Obviously, Bobby Wagner as the captain of a ship with a bunch of kids and cast-off veterans getting enough done to get to the postseason, to get to the NFC title game. But Myles Garrett would give you a completely different dimension. You don't think Dan Quinn would love him after what he did with Micah Parsons and then all those years that he had in Seattle with all those great pass rushers. Garrett would turn that around. I look at the Chargers. We just talked about the Chargers needing edge help and having a bunch of cap space. Well, maybe you could still re-sign Khalil Mack even at a discount and then go, Jim Harbaugh, Jesse Minter. Boy, if I had Mack, if I had Myles Garrett, Thule behind him kind of rotating in, especially in run defense, boy, you're talking. I think there's so many teams right here that Minnesota's another one. We talk about, okay, what's a move that could put us over the top, and we have the cheap quarterback and we can afford it. There are so many options here, and it's just going to be about which team is going to give up the draft capital to really satisfy Cleveland in all of this.
Can I throw out a scorched earth scenario?
Absolutely.
What if Harry Roseman figures something out here? They could use some help at edge. I don't know what the cap space. I don't know how they would make it work cap wise in Philadelphia.
So they have $18 million right now, and I'm sure that's
one of the few positions where they could actually stand to improve a little bit at. And if you had Myles
because
Garrett,
the big thing is they whiffed on the Bryce Huff signing. Yeah. That's the big one. They're kind of stuck with him for
Nolan
one
Smith
more year.
Good. Yeah.
But you look at okay. I'm trying to find maybe some options here. If you were to,
how about if they do it, the Eagles adding 2 disgruntled superstars in Saquon Barkley and Myles Garrett in back-to-back years.
You can't ever count them out, right?
No.
And again, they're going to be picking 31st or 32nd, and they're going to be probably in that similar range in the late 20s.
It would cost probably 2 first-round picks.
Right. It's sure. I think it would cost anybody 2 first-round picks, unless like Tennessee were to turn around and say, we'll just give you the first pick for it. But I don't think that's happening. They're not in a position to do that. I think it would take for most teams at least probably, my guess, if I were taking a guess right now, like 2 firsts and a third.
Wow.
I think is what it would take. He's the best defensive player in football. Yeah. He's worth that. And honestly, for any of those teams we just mentioned, for Detroit, for Washington, for the Chargers picking in the early 20s, a team. If we're going for the younger team that's kind of trying to get themselves into that sort of contention, and you have a higher draft pick, and you maybe Bears.
Ooh, that wouldn't cost 2. I don't think that it would probably be. Top 10 pick.
The good thing is that it's 10th overall this year.
Yeah.
And then see these are all the scenarios. We're going to do this for weeks on end now with this. Is that so think about the Bears packaging something around the 10th pick. So maybe they go the 10th pick in 2 seconds or something like that. And then the Browns are picking 2 and 10. And then I have a case for them to go, okay, maybe you take Abdul Carter. And then at 10, I don't know, you get even Will Campbell or something like that, start fixing the trip. But those are the picks they need to make. That's the Browns part of this intrigues me because they need non-quarterback assets. If they draft a rookie quarterback at 2 overall, they will ruin him.
Yeah.
They'll just ruin him right off rip. They're not even good enough to support that. Just go let Jameis start for a year, Justin Fields if the Steelers don't want him, or there's been Kirk Cousins you mentioned with the Stefanski connection, because Kevin Stefanski's got to be feeling like a lame duck now, because it's hard to think that they're going to reset, say in 26, if it's Arch Manning or something like that, and keep Stefanski just as a matter of resetting the whole thing, right? I would, if I was someone else, I would hire Stefanski in a heartbeat. He's a fantastic coach. It's just
he's 2-time coach of the year, yeah.
Right, he made the playoffs with Joe Flacco off the couch, right? I don't think this is an indictment of him. I just think Garrett knows where the Browns are going. The Browns likely know where the Browns are going. I would put them probably is the favorite to be the worst team in football next year.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if they trade Garrett. I mean, they just need to pick up draft assets and start getting towards the future and try to start winning by the time that Watson contract, by the time they can really get out from underneath that.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating what happens with Myles Garrett. It really is kind of like the Luka Doncic of the NFL.
This is now the number one story of the offseason, more than the draft, more than Sam Darnold, more than T. Higgins. It's this. This is what we need to watch for every single day. Is where is Myles Garrett going? Because he's the. You usually only say this about quarterbacks. He's the type of player that can change the power structure of the league.
Yeah.
If he goes to Detroit, we're sitting there going, oh, shoot, with him and Hutch. Or if he goes to Washington, we're like, oh, now they have Jaden Daniels and Myles Garrett. That's cool. Okay, that's a good start, right? Or if he goes to Philly, I don't even know how you'd ever score on them, like you mentioned. The Bears, it would make them legit. The Packers, who desperately need edge help, that would put them on a different level on defense. He is now the center of attention this offseason, and it's going to be just fascinating to watch the number of teams that could be in on this, the crazy offers that we're going to at least be rumored to hear about. I mean, and for a player of this caliber in his prime who doesn't need a scheme fit, it doesn't matter what defense he's in. He's just going to get out there and be the best player on the field. This is going to be now it was already going to be a fun offseason with as many teams, new coaches and quarterbacks and all that, but this is the number one story now.
He's been a superstar. He's been a superstar his entire life. I mean, he was one of the top recruits coming out of high school. I think he was the number 2 overall recruit coming out of high school. One of the best edges we've ever seen in PFF college history. And then now he's been the best defensive player in the NFL for a while now. So over the last 3 seasons, he has a 95.1 PFF grade, first in the NFL. 44 sacks, first in the NFL. 24.4% pass rush win rate, first in the NFL. And he's only 29 years old. Like, there's still a few years of prime, maybe even more than a few years of prime Myles Garrett that we ever made.
I look at so many teams. Denver, could they be in that mix? I know your guy Nick Bonito on one edge, but I mean, look, Myles Garrett. It's just that thing of like, you add Myles Garrett to any team in theory. And now I just wonder how quickly this gets done. We've got a little over a month to go, about 5-6 weeks to go to free agency. Does this get done before then? Or if it doesn't get done before then, do we start getting a big holdup in free agency about, okay, where is he going and who's got the cap space? Because this is going to happen quickly, because you have to be able to afford a $20 million cap hit next year, and I believe the year after, and then it goes, I think there's one more year on the contract where it's heavy. From there, it's kind of backloaded.
And if you're the Browns, you're going to want draft picks this year as well. You're not going to want to get a 2026 and 2027 first round pick.
Yeah, this is not something you wait until
post-draft.
No, this is like it, because if a team like the Bears comes calling you thinking about the 10th overall pick, you have to do that as soon as you can. So I think the Browns it would be stubborn of them at this point not to trade him, especially when he's requested it. They have to do it. This is now what he's given you, despite the fact that you'd have to trade Myles Garrett to get there. What he's given the Browns is an opportunity to hard reset, and they need a hard reset.
Yeah, and if you're Andrew Berry, word of advice: don't be like Nico Harrison. Call every team in the NFL. Right? Don't just take the first offer you get for a generational player.
Start a bidding war.
Yeah, please, for the love of God, call every team. Don't just take the first offer you get, because, oh boy, it's not the NBA show, but my God, what a horrible trade that was a few years ago. But yeah, Myles Garrett requesting a trade from the Cleveland Browns immediately. Maybe the top non-quarterback in the NFL, Dalton, is now on the block, and it's going to be a fascinating storyline. And he wants to go to a contender as well. This is not a guy where he wants to get paid more. He doesn't care where he goes. He wants to compete for a Super Bowl, and we'll see which contender trades for Myles Garrett, because there are a ton of contenders in the NFL that need some edge help, and obviously could need the best edge rusher in the NFL.
What a shot of adrenaline after a weekend. After one weekend without football, and we come back on Monday, and that's what we get. That's just fantastic.
Absolutely. So Myles Garrett requesting a trade from the Cleveland Browns, and we'll obviously break this down a lot more as the offseason progresses as to where he might be going as well. But let's continue with our playoff autopsies. Where do we even leave off? We got the Los Angeles Rams right now, who went 10-7 on the year. They beat the Vikings in the wild card round, and they lost in the divisional round to the Philadelphia Eagles, eventual NFC champion. It was the 6th playoff appearance in 8 years under Sean McVay as head coach. Dawn, for you, what went right for the LA Rams this year?
The first thing that stands out with this team is just I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago on this. I think they had the best rookie class in football. Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Cam Kinchens, Bo Limmer starting, I think, 15 games at center when he was never expected to be, and he gave him at least serviceable work. Jalen McCullough had 4 interceptions. Omar Spates was starting at linebacker by the end of it. I actually, this rookie class, I lose track of how many guys produced for them because there was so darn many of them, but it starts with Jared Verse immediately becoming a top 10 edge defender in the league per our grading. I mean, just one of the best defensive rookie seasons that we have seen since we've been doing this in 2006. Unbelievable year, because the big suspense coming into the year was, okay, their offense is going to be good. They have Stafford, Nakua, Kupp, Kyren, all that. How are they going to replace Aaron Donald? What are they going to do? I mean, they have Kobe Turner, who's pretty good, but this is Aaron freaking Donald. This is maybe the best defensive tackle of all time, and they just kept pushing, and they took 2 defensive linemen with the first 2 picks in last year's draft. They both hit very, very well. Fisk gave him pass rush juice on the inside. Turner's obviously a great player right next to him. And Verse, you talk about getting a primetime guy to replace a primetime guy. I mean, it's unreal how good he was. I think that's where it starts, is that their defense was better than I expected it to be coming into the season. They really, especially down the middle of it, young players that emerged and really got this team out of a 1-4 hole. Because you got to remember, they had offensive line injuries early. They couldn't block a soul. Stafford did not play well under pressure this year, which can be expected as an older quarterback. He had right around a 90 passing grade in a clean pocket. He was fantastic when they did protect him. But you're talking about this defense, and they're the reason they won that playoff game that they shut down Minnesota. Their pass rush just absolutely got after it. They were a nightmare for Minnesota to block, and they were a nightmare for a lot of teams to block. I would expect that to continue, but I think that's where it starts. Digging out of this hole, getting healthy in the middle of the season, and kind of getting it rolling. But this rookie class set them up for wild success in the years to come, and it was a big worry coming into the season with Aaron Donald retiring. They have no worries about it now.
Mojo in the chat with a great comment saying, who knew Les Snead could build through the draft? RIP F them picks.
Oh, none of us. None of us. For 8 years, he didn't have to.
Yeah, he did it. He finally did it. It was incredible what LA did this year with that rookie class. And overall, they had the 3rd best receiving grade in the NFL. Puka Nacua, the highest graded wide receiver in the NFL after placing 8th as a rookie. Jordan Whittington, Tutu Atwell, Cooper Kupp, all in the top 50 of grade as well. 6th best run blocking grade in the NFL. Kevin Dotson, 5th best run blocking grade among guards. And then you mentioned the pass rush was, with all the rookies, was phenomenal. I mean, Jared Verse looks like a superstar, and he will run away with Defensive Rookie of the Year. He might be unanimous Defensive Rookie of the Year, honestly. He was the 7th highest graded edge in the NFL. 76 pressures were the 4th most among all edge defenders in the league. It's only a rookie. Kobe Turner was 6th in pressures among D tackles, and Braden Fisk, another rookie, was 11th in pressures among D tackles as well. So, yeah, they lose Aaron Donald, maybe the greatest defensive player we've ever seen, but they've rebuilt it quickly with guys like Jared Verse, Kobe Turner, and Braden Fisk as well. In terms of what went wrong for the Rams this year, the 3rd worst pass blocking grade in the NFL, 11th worst rushing grade in the NFL. They only broke a tackle on 15% of carries, which was 27th in the league. 2.5 yards after contact per attempt, 5th worst in the league. Coverage grade, they were 21st there as well. None of their corners finished in the top 50 of grade this year. So, yeah, they replaced Aaron Donald really well. Replacing Jalen Ramsey has been a struggle for this team. They've really struggled at quarterback since they lost Jalen Ramsey. And the other thing, too, Matthew Stafford showed some signs of slowing down this year. 73.3 passing grade. He was 21st in overall grade as well. He's now 37 years old. I think he's already announced he's coming back for another year. There's some rumors he might retire. He will be coming back, I think, for another year. But if you're Los Angeles and you're Sean McVay, you might as well start thinking about, okay, what's next at quarterback? Because we probably only got 1 or 2 years left of Matthew Stafford, and even so, he still was kind of played at a below average level this past year.
Well, do you think about what's next, or do you just go, they're another team? Do you go all in right now, go get Myles Garrett and try to win it next year?
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to be the question for all of these teams. Well, do we just trade for Myles Garrett and blow it out and try to make one big run?
Goes back to
go right back to it.
Lord, it's time to go back to the old me.
Yeah. I think Rams games this year for me, watching the tape every week, were one of the easiest teams to watch because I could go into it expecting, look, if they pass protected today, they probably won. If they didn't, they lost. Because Stafford now, being as old as he is, and he's not as mobile as he used. I think, what did he scramble once or twice all season, right? He was great when clean. and he had one of the worst. He had one of the worst passing grades in the league under pressure. I think it was in the low 30s. Right? It just, you have that split now, and I think once you have that, that's just going to be the X factor in winning and losing, right? And they had a bunch of injuries up front early in the year. That's why they started 1-4. They couldn't block anybody. Stafford's not one that's going to create outside the pocket anymore. And he can still throw with the best of them. There's no question. But they've got questions to answer on this offensive line. I think especially the 2 tackle spots, and especially with their left tackle, Alaric Jackson, who really had a breakout year, especially down the stretch. He was one of the better tackles in football. He's going to make some money. And the question is going to be whether the Rams can afford to pay him that and still continue to improve the rest of their team. I think you could see him get close somewhere around a $20 million contract. Wouldn't surprise me. He could be one of the higher paid tackles in football because pass protection is at such a premium, and he's a young player who had a breakout year. So there's going to be big questions at offensive tackle. And then you mentioned it too, coverage, right? I think they got better at safety. Cam Kinchens, like I mentioned, broke out for them as a rookie at safety. Cam Curl was solid back there too as a free agent acquisition, but they got to get better at offensive tackle and they got to get better at corner. Those are the 2 major spots on this team. And the only other thing I question, remember last year, Sean McVay wanted Brock Bowers. He tried to trade up to get him. That's the only thing I do wonder about in this draft. Is I go, are they kind of a wild card trade? Is it Tyler Warren that he wants? If he falls far enough, could he get there from the 26th overall pick? That's a spot, but I think that's also, I don't want to say a luxury, but it's not first on the list. Like a tight end, I don't think is going to make or break them. They need offensive tackles and they need corners to improve this offseason if they're going to win the Super Bowl next year.
And not only that, I mean, there's 2 first-round caliber tight ends, right? It's not just Tyler Warren, it's Colson Loveland as well, right? And you rarely get that where you have 2 tight ends that you're like, okay, I'll take a first-round pick on those guys. And yeah, it's a good point because Brock Bowers, they very much were in the Brock Bowers sweepstakes last year. They couldn't get him. Maybe a Tyler Warren or Colson Loveland. I mean, they're not Brock Bowers level, but they are very, very good tight end prospects and worth first-round picks. Alaric Jackson. So, again, we have free agent rankings available at PFF.com. Go check it out. We have full contract projections for all of the top, I think, 100 free agents we have. Jackson's projected contract, 4 years, $58 million. Means he's averaging about $14.5 million a year.
Oh, so, I wouldn't be shocked. If at his age, I would not be shocked if he blew that away. And,
yeah,
and as bad as some teams need pass protection and need tackles, I would not be shocked if it's well more than. It wouldn't shock me if it was 4 years at 70 to 80. Because starting caliber tackles, we've seen it. They're hard to come by, and when you have
26 years old, yeah,
and that's the big thing. He's 26 years old, and we've seen in the past couple of years, offensive line projections have at times been blown out of the water because of age and because how badly some teams need a player like that. I mean, I think about, I'm just trying to see even Washington, that could be a team, and you move Brandon Coleman around. I think about a team even like, if the Saints wanted to move some things around and move Trevor Penning inside. I'm just thinking about different teams here where you're like, okay, yeah, a starting caliber left tackle helps a lot. Tennessee, maybe on the right side, if you flip him over, you move Latham back over. Cincinnati, I mean, there's so many teams that need offensive line help. I think he could very well get more than that.
Yeah, let's talk about the Rams for what they could do this offseason. So they have 20th in assets this year in terms of effective cap space, restructure potential, and draft picks. Notable free agents: Alaric Jackson, we talked about him before, Demarcus Robinson, Bobby Brown III, Troy Reeder, Christian Roseboom, Mikello Witherspoon. Those are some notable free agents. And then big kind of storyline, Dawn. Are they going to have Cooper Kupp next year? There's been a lot of rumors about trading him potentially, and obviously Puka Nacua has kind of filled that slot receiver role very well for them. That could be an interesting one too, because he obviously wasn't a great year for Kupp this past year. That could be a potential trade piece for them this offseason.
Well, your problem is he has dealt with injury issues as well, and I think you start to see him slow down a little bit. And the big thing with him, he's got a $30 million cap hit coming.
Yeah,
and he's just not producing like a guy that's worth a $30 million cap hit. So I mean, if you trade him or you cut him post June 1st. You can cut out about half of that immediately and start really saving. But that's going to be a big, unless he takes a pay cut and he really, really wants to stay, I think that's going to be a problem for them this offseason. You can't have Cooper Kupp with the consistent lower body injuries that he's had, and as much as Nakua's taken over that number one role, right?
Yeah.
And Kupp just hasn't. He's not a guy who's producing at a level that's worth a $30 million cap hit. That's something we're going to hear about very soon, and I don't know if that means he'll be out of there or not, if they can get him a pay cut or restructure something, but I cannot imagine they're going to keep him at that cap hit.
Yeah. Other positions they got to improve at. Corner, I mentioned before, without Jalen Ramsey, they just really struggle at corner. Potentially number 26 overall, you can get a good corner there, maybe like a Jade Barron or Siobhan Revelle or someone. Linebacker, I mean, you mentioned before, Troy Reader and Christian Roseboom, both free agents, both of them sub 60 PFF grades this past year, so it's not like even with them, they were very good at linebacker. Alaric Jackson, if he leaves, you got to find another starting caliber offensive tackle as well, so maybe at number 26 it could be a move. And you mentioned before, starting caliber tight end, man. I like Hunter Long, Kobe Parkinson, but they're better as backups, I think, in the NFL. So maybe after how interested Sean McVay was in Brock Bowers last year, maybe Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland is in play for them at 26 overall this year.
It's going to be the argument against Myles Garrett for this team is that they have other key spots that they have to fill in. When you have to fill in tackle and probably both starting corner spots, it's hard to convince yourself that Myles Garrett's the one piece when you're probably at that point pretty close to out of money to sign a left tackle, or and you're picking in the 20s. We don't necessarily know that there's a franchise left tackle that's going to be in the 20s that'll put you over the top this next season. So everybody's going to be on that list, and that now again, this is going to be the context we have to talk about all of this, where it's like, well, could they fit Myles Garrett in there? And that's the last piece, because that's what a team is going to be looking at. I don't think for the Rams that would be the case, but hell, you can put Garrett and Verse on a roster. Maybe you just go ahead and do it.
Yeah. All right, that wraps up the Los Angeles Rams, who, again, made their 6th playoff appearance in the last 8 years, or in their 8 years under Sean McVay. Next team we're talking about is the Baltimore Ravens, who finished the year 12-5, won the AFC North, beat the Steelers in the wild card round before losing in the divisional round to the Bills. They made the playoffs for the 6th time in 7 years since drafting Lamar Jackson. So, what went right, Dalton? A big part of it was Lamar Jackson just being superhuman once again.
Yep, they had the highest graded quarterback in the NFL. They had the highest graded running back in the NFL. Once they figured out the structure of how they wanted their secondary to be, with Kyle Hamilton on the back end and Adarius Washington in the starting lineup and Nate Wiggins playing more. After Week 10, they had the number 2 coverage grade in the NFL. I got to be honest, I think this year is going to hurt. This is a year that's really going to hurt Ravens fans with the way that they went out in the playoffs. And as good as this team, there were moments this year where they looked like the best team in football.
I was going to say they were the most complete team, at least in the AFC this year. You can make an argument with them and the Eagles for the most complete team in football, but if you're looking at the best overall rosters, it might be the Ravens and Eagles.
Yeah, no, I mean the Chiefs all year, as they usually are, skinned by in 1-score games, and they're a relative. They have their flaws, right, with offensive tackle and thin at receiver, but the Ravens, I mean, there were times this year they just looked unstoppable, especially when they figured the defense out in the second half of the year. I think when you're talking about what went right, they put them outside of having the number 1 seed, essentially, with a couple of losses. Obviously, the close one to the Chiefs in Week 1 really hurt them. And then I think the only thing you could point to with as much as went right and how well they played was there was a couple of games in here you can't go losing. Because I think at this point, if you're going to beat the Chiefs, you have to find a way to get the 1 seed. You gotta get them out of Arrowhead, and for Baltimore to enter. And this was the problem that I had with either the Bills or the Ravens trying to make the Super Bowl was, well, you got to beat 2 of the other 3, whereas the Chiefs only had to beat the Texans and then 1 of the others. So, look, a lot went right for the Ravens. Lamar probably on his way to a 3rd MVP. Derrick Henry had an all-time great season. Their defense got better as the year went on, but I think it's a year that's really going to hurt, because they were good enough. They were probably good enough to win the whole thing.
Yeah. Highest graded offense in the NFL, first in EPA per play. Lamar Jackson, 94.9 PFF grade, led all quarterbacks in the NFL. It was the best grade of his career by 4.5 points. And this is a guy who won 2 MVPs before this year. It still was his best grade by far this past year. And then the scariest rushing attack in the NFL with Lamar Jackson and adding Derrick Henry from the Titans. Henry led all running backs with a 94.2 PFF grade, his best of his career by 2.4 points. Again, incredible considering how amazing he was in Tennessee. Second best receiving grade in the NFL as well. Zay Flowers took a step forward in his second year. Rashad Bateman, Tylan Wallace, Nelson Aguilar were viable complementary pieces as well. The best tight end duo in the NFL in Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. 7th best pass blocking grade in the NFL. Defense is really good. 6th best defensive grade, 9th in EP play, 5th in run D grade, 8th in coverage grade. Nate Wiggins, Marlon Humphrey were really good. Kyle Hamilton, Adarius Washington were really good as well. Just overall, it was a great year for Baltimore. But I think in terms of what went wrong, Dalton, the Zay Flowers injury killed them in their playoffs. 59.3 receiving grade in their loss to the Bills in the divisional round. That was the lowest all year for the Bills. And at edge defender, they really lack a true difference maker. Kyle Van Noy, Odafe, each outside the top 20 edges in grading. Linebackers were 22nd in grading. Roquan Smith kind of regressed a little bit with a 66.8 grade. That's over 11 points lower than his prior year. O-line overall was 18th in grade as a unit as well. So kind of an average offensive line as well. But by all accounts, besides a few key injuries, I mean, this is still one of those complete rosters in football.
Yeah, I think it's that playoff loss to the Bills is going to sting, especially when you consider the biggest reason for it was their own mistakes. They shot themselves in the foot throughout that game. The fumbles, drops, Mark Andrews obviously dropping the 2-point conversion. I think, look, they're in that zone right now, and I think there's a couple of teams in the league like this where you just got to keep swinging.
Yeah.
You just got to keep swinging. You keep adding good players to your team, and you have the quarterback that's capable of doing it. You obviously have Derrick Henry. He's just ageless, apparently. He's going to just run for 1,900 yards forever. I just think you keep swinging. There's not much else to say, I think, right now to Ravens fans other than you just – first of all, again, I think the losses that stick out in the regular season, the Chiefs won in Week 1, where they're lost by a toenail because Chiefs. But the losses to the Raiders and the Browns, I think, really hurt you. You can't go losing games like that. Now, again, the Chiefs are 15-2, really 15-1 because they didn't even have to play Week 18. Maybe you wouldn't have got the 1 seed anyway. But the fact that your road was having to go to Buffalo, where they haven't lost a game all year, and to Kansas City, where they hadn't lost a game all year. Now that I think about it, it's just tough. You have to have just, sometimes when you're making a Super Bowl run, things just have to break right for you. And I think in a big spot, especially with the Flowers injury happening when it did, and then the mistakes that they made in Buffalo in that last game, you just sometimes you got to be a little bit lucky. And they weren't. They obviously luck is one thing, but they did need to execute better. They lost. They shot themselves in the foot in that Bills game, and who knows if they would have had a better shot to go into Arrowhead and win, or if the Chiefs just have the black magic that they always do down there in Arrowhead, especially in the playoffs. But you just keep swinging, and you come back next year and you go, well, we have the MVP, and we have all these tools, and we have a really good team, and we just got to win more ball games.
Yeah, in terms of, besides running it back, what Baltimore could do this offseason, they are 28th in assets in terms of effective cap space, draft picks, and restructure potential. Notable free agents, they got Ronnie Stanley as a free agent, Patrick McCarry, Nelson Aguilar, Malik Harrison, Brandon Stevens as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what they could do this offseason. They should look to add a top-tier edge, like I mentioned before. Kyle Van Noy turns 35 this summer. Maybe someone like Jack Sawyer at number 27 overall could make a lot of sense.
I don't know if he would get this low, but a Mike Green from Marshall, depending if he were to get down there, he might end up in the top 20. But I'll tell you, I've said this for a while now. It's a good year to need defensive linemen.
Yeah,
because there's plenty of them. So I think if they wanted to go that route in this draft, sure. And again, there's always depth at receiver if they want another receiver. Or maybe they're in the offensive tackle boat. Yep. Maybe they're a team if they clear some space. Maybe Alaric Jackson from the Rams is someone that appeals to them.
Maybe another corner too in that room.
Yeah.
They're pretty like Marlon Humphrey and Nate Woods are great, but maybe one more guy.
Yeah, or I think about even in the draft, maybe a slot corner to move Humphrey back to the outside because he played in the slot a lot this year. So I think you have options out there. I think that left tackle spot where it may or may not be Ronnie Stanley is going to be something to watch for.
Yeah, absolutely. Just Ronnie Stanley's projected contract, 2 years, $40 million by $20 million a year. He might even get more than that, honestly.
He's one of the best pass protectors in football. So it would hurt them if they didn't find some sort of immediate replacement. And obviously Jackson can be back there and running around all he wants, but you still need to protect your quarterback.
And listen, I know Myles Garrett wants to go play for a contender. The Ravens need help at edge defender. The Browns are not trading him to the Baltimore Ravens.
They already gave Baltimore a whole team once. They're not. They're not. If there's anywhere he's not going, unless the price was just out of this world. They just were like, hey, here's 4 firsts. Then I might do it. But
you don't trade a player of this caliber to a division rival. That's just not something you do. So Saquon Barkley, of course, signed with the Eagles. The Giants would die before trading him to the Eagles.
Anyone in Baltimore or Cincinnati can pretty much just shut it down.
Yeah, it's not happening. Yeah, no. And yes, TJ Watt, Myles Garrett pairing ain't happening either, unfortunately. So that's the one kind of contender that needs an edge. You go like, that's not happening. He's not going to Baltimore. Myles Garrett would not be going there. Maybe an edge defender in the first round or even second round. So loaded edge class could be an option for the Baltimore Ravens. Final team that lost in the divisional round we got to talk about is the Detroit Lions, going 15-2 on the year, number 1 seed in the NFC, but they lose in their first playoff game, the divisional round, to the Commanders. It was the Lions' best record in team history, and they've made back-to-back playoffs for the first time since 1995. So it's been an excellent run for Detroit. A lot of questions to be answered, though, now after losing both their star coordinators to head coaching jobs. But what went right, Dalton, for the Lions this year?
I mean, this offense was just unstoppable. I mean, there's just not much else you could say about it. For the most part, outside of, even in the loss to the Commanders, they scored 31 points, even with, 3 or 4 turnovers, and they were still, Jahmyr Gibbs was running all over the place, and feels like St. Brown is open every play, and I think a big development was Jameson Williams finally just playing a whole season with no injuries, no distractions, anything like that. He really emerged as a big-time second target for them, right? I think you have legitimate superstars on offense in those guys in the offensive line, Penei Sewell especially up front, Frank Ragnow at center. I mean, they did everything offensively that we expected them to do, right? And it got them to a 15-2 record, and it really was to no fault of them that they got to where they got to, right? I mean, and the season ended even the way that it did. But no, this team's offensive talent alone makes them a Super Bowl contender. They just need execution in big moments, and obviously the injuries on defense killed it. But I mean, it's a pretty clear cutoff when you look at the success of this team and you go, well, why did they succeed? Because they had arguably the best offense in football.
Yeah, I mean, the Lions were absolutely phenomenal this year on offense. Second highest grade offense in the NFL, second in EPA per play, best receiving grade in the NFL. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 5th highest grade receiver. Jameson Williams, his first 1,000-yard season this year, 650 yards more than his previous career high. David Montgomery led all running backs in receiving grade. Jahmyr Gibbs was 9th in receiving grade. And Sam Laporta, even in a down sophomore season, still the 6th best receiving grade among tight ends in the NFL. 5th best rushing grade in the NFL. 2nd best run blocking grade in the NFL. And the other thing, Dawn, still the 5th best defensive grade despite a ton of injuries on that side of the ball. 6th best coverage grade. Kirby Joseph is the highest grade safety in the NFL. Aiden Hutchinson looked like he was going to run away with Defensive Player of the Year before going down with a season-ending injury in Week 6. He had a 94.9 PFF grade. So even though they had a lot of injuries defensively, I think Aaron Glenn still did overall a really good job just patching it together what they had there.
That's true. And I think that's where it starts, is the Hutchinson injury, because through Week 6, the Lions had the highest pass rush grade in football, understandably. Why? And I think in the same breath that we mention Myles Garrett being added to a team and changing the power structure of the league, that's what happens when you took Hutchinson and the subtraction of him with this injury, right? And once he went out, they became a bottom 8 team in pass rush grade for the rest of the season. I know they added Zadarius Smith, but it's just not the same, right? They didn't have any sort of pass rush in big spots. They gave up 30-plus points in 4 of their last 6 games this year. So it just eventually it caved in. The Hutchinson injury, the lack of pass rush, the injuries at linebacker were just crazy. I mean, they were shuffling through basically Jack Campbell and practice squad guys for a while. I just think the depth of injuries to their front 7 especially, it just eventually was just going to cave. And it was the fear. The minute Hutchinson got hurt, that was the fear is, oh, do they have enough?
Yeah.
And honestly, and they just didn't. And I get it. And it hurts because, again, you have their best regular season in team history, and you lose to a Commanders team that probably isn't as complete as them, right? But when you don't get a pass rush to a quarterback like Jaden Daniels, these things can happen. And that's exactly what happened. And I just think now you have major questions with both coordinators taking head coaching jobs. I mean, and they're 2 really good coordinators, especially Ben Johnson. What does it look like? Can they still be the best offense in football? Is there a different vision on defense now coming in that can maximize the talent of some of these players, young players like a Jack Campbell, like a Terrion Arnold? These are the kids that are going to make the difference in them staying in Super Bowl contention, those young players on defense developing. And then, look, the Hutchinson injury was a bad injury, right? I mean, you get carted off in the air cast and you're done for the year basically on site. Can he come back and play at that level that he was playing? I mean, when he got hurt, he finished this year with a 38% pass rush win rate, which if you're above 20, you're dominating people, and he was at 38.
Yeah.
He was on pace for an all-time great year, and if he was healthy, they might have won the whole thing, and that just set everything back. So I think who knows how different this team is going to look, but they have so much talent that they still should be good next year.
They still should be, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned that the injuries and defense. They gave up 45 points in that divisional round loss to the Commanders. Of their 22 defensive players on the preseason two-deep depth chart, 10 of them were absent from that game. Almost half of their two-deep depth chart guys from the preseason were absent in that divisional round game. So just an insane amount of injuries on that defensive side of the ball. Offense, they had the 15th best pass blocking grade, and Jared Goff was 16th in PFF grade, more of like an average play from Jared Goff this past year. In terms of what they have in the offseason, 27th in assets between draft picks, effective cap space, and restructure potential. Notable free agents: Carlton Davis III, Kevin Zeitler, Levi Onwuzurike, Tim Patrick, Marcus Davenport, Ben Johnson to the Bears, offensive coordinator, now the head coach of the Bears. Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator, now the head coach of the Jets. They got John Morton as the OC. He was the Broncos passing game coordinator in the last 2 years. Kelvin Shepard is the new DC. He was the Lions linebackers coach in the last 3 years as well. It kind of reminds me a lot, Dalton, of when I know they didn't win it all or make it very far to the playoffs like the Eagles made all the way to the Super Bowl, but it reminds me of when the Eagles lost both Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon to head coaching jobs. It took a couple years for them to like kind of reset after that. I think it might take a little bit of time for the Lions to reset, even though they are such a loaded roster overall. I think adding an edge opposite of Aiden Hutchinson is critical. Zadarius Smith was a good addition. He's 32 years old. Jack Sawyer in the first round, we've always been mocking it just for the vibes of it, of having an Ohio State edge and a Michigan edge like that.
Well, the thing is, are they going to add an edge or they're going to add the edge?
Or the edge,
but
right.
This is
Myles
the first
Garrett.
team everybody's going to talk about now.
Yep.
Is the Lions, because you go, they're close to Super Bowl ready. They have the offense to do it. They have a boatload of talent. And again, just the almost Madden franchise level idea of having Aiden Hutchinson and Myles Garrett on the field together, in part because Hutchinson's not making huge money yet, and he's going to probably reset the record books when it comes.
He'll sign one next year.
Yeah. So, or next year, yeah, because he'll be eligible to negotiate that, and eventually a fifth-year option. You have.
No, actually, I think he's eligible to sign one this year.
He might be eligible this year,
Yeah.
but that's still kind of a future thing where you have one more year and then fifth-year option, and,
Right.
and you can kind of push that down the line a little bit. You have a window here where it is feasible, and you start thinking about it, and then you have different conversations in the draft. If you were to get if you get Myles Garrett, your first-round pick is going to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
So then you go, okay. You look at it, the value sense of that, and you go, okay, would I rather have whoever, Jack Sawyer or Mike Green or whoever at 29, 28 now, divisional round still, or you'd rather have Myles Garrett, and you really try to make a push for this thing. I think now, again, this is where it changes the power structure of the league. And if that ever happened, the level of hype right back on Detroit, even after this year, would just be off the charts. I don't know how you'd block him. I have no idea.
Yeah. Linebacker, they need more help there as well. Jack Campbell was 10th highest rated linebacker this past year, but they have Malcolm Rodriguez and Alex Anzalone. Good linebacker room overall, but could stand to add more to that room. And I think the interior offensive line as well. Do everything you can. Kevin Zeitler was about to be 35 years old, but he was the third highest graded guard in the league this past year. Graham Glasgow, 57.2 grade, his worst since his rookie year. I think the other guard spot can be improved. And then Frank Ragnow, still one of the best centers in the NFL, but he has battled some injuries over the last few years as well. So help out the interior offensive line a little bit, maybe adding a new starting caliber guard could be the move, and maybe adding a guy like Myles Garrett could be the move for the Detroit Lions as well. We'll see. Before we move on to the final two teams in our playoff autopsies, the two teams that lost in the conference championship round, we got to talk about the final sponsor of the show, and that is DraftKings. Have you played Pick 6 from DraftKings yet? What are you waiting for? You better get on it. The Super Bowl is here, and time is running out. As the official daily fantasy sports partner of the NFL, DraftKings does fantasy sports like nobody else. Play for better payouts on Pick 6. It's super easy to get started. Select two or more players. Choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like touchdowns, yardage, sacks, and more. Pick 6 is available in most states, including Missouri, California, Texas, Georgia, and more. And DraftKings is making it even sweeter for first-timers. New Pick 6 customers, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. A matchup I like in the Super Bowl at least. Got to look at Saquon Barkley, man. he is going to be the guy that Philadelphia probably tries to ride to a Lombardi trophy in this game. He's been incredible for the Philadelphia all year. I would probably go with the over on both rushing yards and maybe even rushing touchdowns as well. He's going to be a player they really, really rely on, I think, in Super Bowl 59. Win more cash on Pick 6. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code PFF. That's code PFF for new customers to play $5 and get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 30 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. All right, final two teams talking about the Washington Commanders going 12-5 on the year, beating the Buccaneers in the wildcard round, beating the Lions in the divisional round, and then losing in the NFC Championship to the Eagles. Their first conference title game appearance since 1991. In their first year with Dan Quinn as head coach and Jaden Daniels at quarterback, and they were the second worst team in the NFL last year, Dalton, at 4-13. So how on earth do the Commanders go from being the second worst team in the NFL to being one game away from making the Super Bowl?
Jaden Daniels. I mean, it's that simple. You go from having Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett and whatever the mess that they've had, at quarterback for the last 5-6 years, and you suddenly get a quarterback who is 5th in overall grade this season, one of the most dynamic dual-threat players in the league already, and just an incredible transition he made from LSU to the NFL. It just felt like outside of the first game against Tampa, when Todd Bowles is notorious for beating rookies, it was just seamless. He was one of the 6 best quarterbacks in football this year. I think you have the big 4 of Allen, Burrow, Mahomes, Jackson. Justin Herbert was in that mix because he was spectacular too, but I don't think anybody else I would put above Daniels this season. I mean, he was just super low. I think the 3rd lowest turnover-worthy play rate in the league. Really the most dynamic runner in the league aside from Lamar Jackson. Accurate, manages the pocket well. He was everything. Even for as much as I had him QB1 before, when we were going through the draft process, you could never expect a kid to do this. And this is right after, you mentioned it earlier, we just got C.J. Stroud doing something like this last year. And Daniels found a way to top that. I mean, it just unreal performance from him and a really good rookie class in general. It was arguably my favorite rookie class going into it. When we finished the draft, I talked about it. Mike Sainris still. Johnny Newton, it took some time to get over an injury, but he contributed down the stretch. Brendan Coleman was starting for him at left tackle. I just think you couldn't have drawn up for Dan Quinn and Adam Peters a better first year, especially with the way Daniels played, than they had this year. And making the NFC title game, honestly, it's just a cherry on top. They could have, even if they had lost to the Bucs in the wild card round, I would have been like, this is just an incredible year for Washington. And you look at the potential of what they can do with Daniels as their quarterback and all the resources they have to add to this team. They're going to be thinking they have a window here. Again, it's that rookie quarterback contract window where it's like, okay, we have resources to spend elsewhere. Do we want a Myles Garrett? Do we want a T. Higgins? Can we still have another draft class this good? How do we want to allocate all these assets? But man, oh man, I mean, you just couldn't be. If you're a Commanders fan, you couldn't be any happier with the way this year went, especially for the quarterback.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the fact that they made the playoffs at all is incredible. Then they beat the Buccaneers in the first round. That's really good. And you're like, okay, wow. Then you're like, okay, well, we're playing the Lions now. Then they beat the Lions in the divisional round. And then all of a sudden, yes, they get blown out in the conference championship game to the Eagles. But if you're a Commanders fan, it's like, dude, I don't care we lost by 32 in the conference title game. Obviously, you want to make the Super Bowl, but it's like, what an incredible year after being the second worst team in the NFL, after being so down in the dumps for a while, right? It hasn't just been like, oh, it was one bad year last year, now we're back. No, it's been a long time for the. Like I said, last time they made the conference title game was 1991. It's been over 30 years since the Commanders made the conference title game, because of Jaden Daniels and because of how good Dan Quinn was, building the culture there in Washington. New ownership. I think I really understated new ownership in Washington. That's huge, right? Because they had maybe the worst ownership in all of sports with Dan Snyder at the helm. immediately you see, a new culture is in Washington right now with the new ownership and obviously adding a great head coach in Dan Quinn and a phenom at quarterback in Jaden Daniels. 90.6 PFF grade, 5th best in the NFL as only a rookie. The 2nd highest graded rookie season we've ever seen in PFF history, which dates back all the way to 2006. Only Russell Wilson in 2012 had a higher PFF grade than Jaden Daniels as a rookie. Also, Commanders, big part of Jaden Daniels as well, the rushing grade, a 7th best rushing grade in the NFL. Kind of a good trio they had in the backfield between Brian Robinson Jr., Jeremy McNichols, and Austin Eckler. The ageless wonder, Bobby Wagner, 3rd highest graded linebacker in the NFL at 34 years old. And really, yes, he was amazing on the field. He was a veteran presence they needed in that locker room. So much newness in that organization. To have a guy like Bobby Wagner, who's obviously worked with Dan Quinn before back in Seattle, to have him there is just like, okay, we can learn from this guy. We could follow this guy. He could be our leader. That was huge for, I think, Washington as well. So having that kind of veteran presence, Bobby Wagner, was massive. Dalton, in terms of what went wrong, I mean, it's incredible they got this far with how flawed their team was this year. 2nd lowest graded defense in the NFL. Only the Panthers had a lower defensive grade than the Commanders. 3rd worst coverage grade. 4th worst run defense grade. The 7th lowest graded offensive line in the league. And not much of wide receiver outside of Terry McLaurin. So really, what this was Jaden Daniels being that freaking amazing that they made this magical run with overall a roster that still needs a lot of work.
Yeah, they need a ton of work, and that's when you have the quarterback, it can change everything, and this is the perfect example of it. Yeah, they're an incredibly flawed team. Did they make plays in the right moments when they needed to? I think about the Lions game with the turnovers, absolutely, but they still gave up 31 points in that game. Eventually, they were going to lose because you can't win every shootout like that. You got to make stops eventually, but no, I think the fun part of this team, they just won 12 games with a rookie quarterback. You mentioned it, a team with a whole lot of flaws, but a lot of resources to fill those gaps in. Wait till they get somebody to help McLaurin at wide receiver. Wait till they get, an offensive line that's not kind of full of just Band-Aid guys, right? You talk about like guys like Andrew Wiley, and it really hurts them that Sam Cosmi tore his ACL in the Detroit game, and he might miss part of next year. That because he's really their best offensive lineman. Wait till they get a legitimate pass rush. Wait till they actually fill it out at corner, after the previous regime whiffed on the Emmanuel Forbes pick, and then the Marshawn Lattimore trade. Obviously, you get what they're trying to do. They're trying to fill a spot, but hamstring injuries just wasn't great. And I don't know that he'll be back next year because I think they can save all $18 million on his contract next year by cutting him. So no, there's several positions on this team that they need to reset, but they've got the resources to do it. And again, when you have a quarterback like this that can get you this far basically on his own, boy, you start to reimagine the ceiling because this is nowhere near this team's ceiling.
No.
And they made the NFC title.
They're ahead of schedule by a lot right now.
They're way ahead of schedule. So, I mean, you talk about what went wrong, and I this is the type of team where I go, maybe not even necessarily wrong. It's just, okay, you fill in these gaps, and we might be talking about you hoisting a trophy at some point soon.
Yeah, the Commanders, in terms of those assets I mentioned before, offseason assets between your draft picks, restructure potential, and effective cap space, 11th in assets. That's easily the best of any playoff team that we have this year. You see 3rd in effective cap space, about $69 million they have to play with this offseason. Notable free agents, Bobby Wagner, Dante Fowler Jr., Jeremy Chin, Zach Ertz, Diami Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, Noah Igbenogany. They need to upgrade this defense everywhere, but especially edge and corner. And you see that right there, that number, $69 million. With the recent news of Myles Garrett requesting a trade and wanting to go to a contender, I think this is absolutely one of the top teams they can go to.
Well, and they can create more room if they need to. Like I said, they can shed all of Lattimore's $18 million salary, so you could add 18 more to that $69 million number. Jonathan Allen might be in for at least a restructure or some sort of renegotiation here. I look at Andrew Wiley, not exactly what you would necessarily want at right tackle if you want to keep him around, but you could ditch him and save most of the $10 million that he's charging next year. I mean, you could end up with a situation where they're close to $100 million in cap space. I mean, you want
for a team that just made the NFC title game.
You want a crazy scenario. Find a way, you get rid of Lattimore at 18, you could end up with Garrett and Higgins. You got enough room for it. What if you did it? What if you just went full nuclear and said, you know what, now's the time, and you went Myles Garrett and T. Higgins, and you add it, and then you just have to figure out a reasonable enough offensive line to get us through on that side of the ball. But I don't think anything is out of question here when it comes to improving this team. They have a ton of assets to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things they should do, bring back Bobby Wagner. We project him to make about $5 million a year. That is a steal for what he is as both a leader and as a top linebacker still in the NFL. They have to bring back Bobby Wagner. Add more at wide receiver. In fact, the only two wide receivers they have under contract heading into next year, Terry McLaurin and Luke McCaffrey. That's it. So there is room to just completely revamp this receiving core around them. Add a potential starting tackle as well. I think that's another spot that could really improve on the offensive line. They have all the assets to do it. One of the league's most exciting quarterbacks. But like I said, this is still a flawed team that really just needs to build around it. But, man, they made an incredible run this year with that flawed of a team. And it's going to be really exciting times to be a Washington Commanders fan right now after not having a very exciting time to be a Washington Commanders fan I'm sure for most Commanders fans in their entire life. Now it's like, okay, wow, we might have something going here with what we got. And Jaden Daniels, the new ownership group, as one of our conference points as well, coming from the Golden State Warriors, who obviously know a lot about building a great championship contender year in and year out. So Devin Smith pointing that out really well. So yeah, it's really impressive what Washington did this year, but there still is a lot they need to work on in order to get over that hump and really become a team that can win the Super Bowl as well. All right, final team we're talking about. The Buffalo Bills going 13-4 this past season, winning the AFC East for their 5th straight year. They beat the Broncos in the wild card round, beat the Ravens in the divisional round. They lost in the AFC title game to, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs. It was their 6th straight playoff appearance. And Dalton, if that Chiefs loss in the playoffs sounds familiar, it's the 4th time in the last 5 years that the Bills have had their season ended by Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. So it feels like the same old for Buffalo, but still a great year for them overall. What went right for the Bills this year?
So this was Josh Allen and Joe Brady proving they could do it without Stephon Diggs. And every week it felt like there was something different in the game plan, whether they were running the football heavy, even with extra offensive linemen out there. They were 3rd in the league in rushing grade this year. James Cook, I think right now he's tied for the league lead in rushing touchdowns. Josh Allen, obviously with his legs, can do just marvelous things. Allen, 5th straight year with at least a 90 PFF grade. No one's ever done it. He was tied at 4 with Tom Brady, 5th straight year with a 90 PFF grade. First quarterback to ever do that. Allen, he's one of the elite players, one of the best players in any position in football. And when you have him alone, what they proved is you can get this far, which is incredible. You can be one of the last 4 teams standing just because you have number 17 at quarterback and Joe Brady calling plays, and he's going to be back for another year. Who knows if he'll be, a head coach next offseason. I think he would be a very hot candidate, but the way that those two orchestrated this offense between the play calling and Allen, again, even without a Stephon Diggs, without a real number 1 receiver, best turnover-worthy play rate of his career, you can just see so locked in mentally. He's seen so much football now at such a high level that nothing phases him, right? And I think it takes the level that it takes to even somewhat phase him is the level that the Chiefs and Steve Spagnuolo have, and even then, he was that close. He had a chance at the end of the game to tie or win a ball game. So what goes right for the Bills is essentially anything centered around Josh Allen, and that'll continue to be the case. He is the reason they win ball games.
He's a 96th grade over the last 4 years. That's the best in the NFL. Likely going to win his first MVP this year. We'll see, actually.
It's 50-50 on that one.
He's right now the betting favorite to win MVP.
Is he really?
Yeah.
That's surprising.
It's him and Lamar, I know, but
there's obviously a case for either. I might even lean towards Allen, but we'll see when the voting comes out. That's going to be a razor-thin margin there.
Yeah, that should be coming out, what?
This week, Wednesday or Thursday,
Is
right?
it Saturday night? Or they do...
I forget what night the
it might be Saturday
I forget what night
honors.
the honors is. I always forget which night it is.
So we'll find out soon if he wins his first MVP or not, or if Lamar Jackson was his 3rd MVP of his career. But he was obviously superhuman for them. 5th best pass blocking grade in the NFL, 8th best pressure rate allowed in the NFL, only 4 sacks allowed in the entire regular season, 7 fewer than any other team in the league. That's an absurd stat. 4 sacks allowed in 17 games is ridiculous for that offensive line. Obviously, Josh Allen did a great job as well, getting rid of the football, never getting sacked as well, but just an incredible number for that team. 3rd best rushing grade, 9th best pass rushing grade. Greg Rousseau had a great year, 10th among all edge defenders with 63 pressures, but that was kind of the one bright spot they had in that defense was the pass rush. Everything else to on. 7th lowest graded defense in the NFL. 2nd worst coverage grade in the NFL at 37.7 team coverage grade. 7th worst run defense grade. Offensively, Khalil Shakir, the only wide receiver with a 70-plus receiving grade this year. So they got to add more at wide receiver after losing Stephon Diggs, obviously. But the big problem with this team this past season was they had one of the 10 worst defenses in football.
It's just, and it's been the Achilles heel for 5 years now. You mentioned ending the year with a playoff loss 5 years straight. They're not going to win a Super Bowl unless this defense gets better. I mean, you look at their last 4 playoff losses; they're giving up 32 points a game. I mean, that's where like the Carolina Panthers were this year for the season. They just can't. They have not been able to find a way, when push comes to shove against Mahomes or on one occasion against Burrow, to just make stops. At least when it's the other side of the ball, and I think the end of this most recent game exemplifies it, is, okay, when Allen has a ball, then the Chiefs are up 3. The Chiefs with Spagnuolo and what they have going on defense at least have a chance to get a stop. They gave up 29 points. Allen, I think, should get more credit for scoring 29 points on Spags at Arrowhead in the AFC title game. But the Chiefs at least have a chance to get a big stop. You don't feel like that with the Bills. You just don't. Even the week before against the Ravens, they didn't make a stop. They gave up a touchdown in 2 minutes, and then Andrews dropped the ball at the goal line. They didn't actually make a stop. Or, in this Chiefs game, when the game was tied, remember when Mahomes got the ball back with about, 6 minutes left?
Yeah.
You knew they were scoring to some effect. I mean, and this is the problem I have with the Bills' defense. Look, number 1 in turnover margin. That's fantastic. That's great. Also, that's in part because Allen and the lack of turnovers this year. But you can't, against Mahomes and Burrow and Lamar and the elite guys, you can't do the bend but don't break thing. And this is what their defense does. They don't have that much talent. Greg Rousseau is their best player, but there's not really any elite talent beyond that. Matt Milano's had injury issues. They weren't able to cover anybody this year. When you talk about 2nd worst coverage grade in the league, it's only ahead of the Raiders, who had the worst one in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you just can't. It's the same as the Commanders, but we give the Commanders a pass because they're a young team and they're ahead of the curve. When you think about the Bills' defense, they're behind it. It's getting worse every year. And, imagine a year next year where they're not, whatever it was, top 5 in takeaways. If they have turnover regression, they're going to look really bad on defense. I mean, you just can't. You're not going to shut them down. You're not going to hold Patrick Mahomes to 10 points. That's not a thing. But you have to be able to make stops when they matter, and they just can't do it. So until they get significantly better on defense, it's going to be hard to think they can get over the top. And Sean McDermott's got to figure out how to fill in these gaps, because this is just what it comes down to every single year. When they need a big stop, whether there's 2 minutes left or there's 13 seconds left, they just don't get it done. So I think any of the slander on Josh Allen about losing playoff games is nonsense.
Yeah.
Their last four playoff losses are giving up 32 points a game. What do you want him to do? I mean, you just can't ask him to be perfect every week, especially on the road. It's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, they need to fix this defense. And they're 25th in assets this offseason in terms of draft capital, in terms of restructure potential, in terms of effective cap space. They have some notable free agents. Amari Cooper, trading for him. He's a free agent. Rasul Douglas, Matt Collins, DeMar Hamlin, all those guys are free agents as well. In terms of what they got to do this offseason, improve the defense. I mean, add serious talent at D tackle, corner, and linebacker. I think those are the 3 positions I'm really targeting for them in the draft. I think they probably should be taking one of those positions with their first-round pick in the NFL draft as well. And then other than that, got to add more wideouts. Got to add more talent at the receiver room. I like Khalil Shakir a lot. Maybe they bring back Amari Cooper for another year, but they need more in that wide receiver room. Even though Josh Allen's incredible and he always raises the floor for what they have, they need more from that receiver room.
It would help if Keon Coleman stepped up and it had a year 2 kind of breakout. He showed flashes this year, but I think for me, I look at this defense and I go, you have Rousseau, you have Ed Oliver under contract, and you have Christian Benford, and Everybody else, I start thinking about if I can improve. Every other guy outside of those three, I'm like, okay, we have to get better. We just can't continue to run out here with a bottom 5 defense in these big moments. Because, I mean, that's, again, the turnovers tilt it in their favor, and it's great to force turnovers, but in between them, just not good enough. I mean, you give up 44 points to the Rams, you give up 42 in a win over the Lions, giving up, 25 against the Ravens isn't terrible, but again, remember the context of the Ravens handed you that game. So, I mean, there's just too many holes right now, and against coaches and quarterbacks that are at an elite level in the playoffs, this is not a defense built to keep up with them.
Yeah. So that wraps up all of our playoff autopsies for all the teams that lost in the playoffs, obviously excluding the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles, who will be playing in the Super Bowl this Sunday. We've got a lot more episodes coming this week to break down all the coaching moves. Tomorrow, got a full Super Bowl preview for you guys coming as well later on in the week, just breaking down Super Bowl 59 between the Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles. We're going live, I think, at 9 a.m. tomorrow, right?
9 a.m. tomorrow.
Yeah, we're going live early tomorrow, 9 a.m. here on the PFF NFL show. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. And, of course, check out PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for access to all of the great stats that we broke down today. For Dalton Wasserman, for our producers back there, I'm Max Chadwick, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.